She walked through the wrong door and into a room that could kill her. Evelyn Carter wasn't supposed to be on the top floor. She wasn't supposed to see the men in tailored suits discussing shipments that didn't exist on any legal manifest. And she definitely wasn't supposed to lock eyes with Victor Hale, the CEO, whose empire was built on blood disguised as business. One mistake, one door, one man who never forgave witnesses. But when she spoke, something shifted, and Victor Hale made a decision that would either save her or destroy them both. If you want to see how far this story reaches, drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. Now, let's begin. The tower stood like a monument to power, 63 floors of steel and glass piercing the skyline of a city that never asked questions it didn't want answered. At street level, the building wore the polished face of legitimacy. Marble lobbies, security badges, quarterly earnings reports that made shareholders smile. But Evelyn Carter had cleaned enough executive floors to know that perfection was always a lie. She'd worked as a janitor at Hale Industries for 3 years. 3 years of pushing carts through hallways after midnight, emptying trash bins filled with the remnants of other people's importance, wiping fingerprints off glass doors that separated her world from theirs. She was 32 years old, and she had perfected the art of being invisible. That invisibility had kept her safe, had kept her employed, had taught her that survival meant keeping your head down and your observations to yourself. Tonight, that safety shattered. It was 11:47 p.m. when Evelyn stepped off the service elevator on the 63rd floor, the top floor, executive territory. She'd been called up to replace Maria, who'd gone home sick and given a specific list: Conference Room A, the executive lounge, and Mr. Hale's private office. Simple, routine. She'd done it before, but when she pushed her cart past the main conference room, she noticed something wrong. The door to Conference Room B, the one that was supposed to be locked, the one that didn't appear on her cleaning schedule, was slightly ajar. Light spilled through the crack. Voices murmured inside. Evelyn should have kept walking, should have finished her route and forgotten what she'd seen. Instead, she hesitated. It was the tone of the voices that stopped her, low, tense, careful. The kind of conversation people had when they were discussing things that couldn't be discussed. Her hand moved toward the door handle before her mind caught up, muscle memory from 3 years of checking rooms before cleaning them. The door swung open. She stepped inside, and everything stopped. 7 men sat around a long obsidian table, their suits expensive enough to pay her salary for a year. Documents covered the surface, spreadsheets, photographs, maps marked with red circles. One man had been speaking, his hand frozen mid-gesture over what looked like shipping manifests. But it wasn't the documents that made Evelyn's breath catch. It was the man at the head of the table, Victor Hale. She'd seen him before, of course, in company emails, in the photographs that hung in the lobby, in the occasional glimpse when he moved through the building like a force of nature. But she'd never been this close, never seen the way his presence seemed to pull all the oxygen from a room. He was 43, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples, and eyes the color of winter storms. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, and he wore power the way other men wore cologne, subtle but unmistakable. When those storm-gray eyes locked onto her, Evelyn felt every muscle in her body scream at her to run. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her fingers white-knuckled on the cart handle. "I didn't know. I was told to clean the executive floor and the door was open. I thought—" "Close the door," Victor said. His voice was quiet, controlled. More terrifying than if he'd shouted. Evelyn's hand trembled as she pulled the door shut behind her, trapping herself inside with them. "Sir," one of the men began, half rising from his seat. He was younger than the others, with nervous energy crackling around him like static. "She's just a cleaner. I'll have security." Victor raised one hand and the man fell silent, as if cut off mid-breath. "Name," Victor said, still looking at Evelyn. "Evelyn Carter." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Ms. Carter." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the kind of attention that made her feel dissected. "Do you make a habit of walking into private meetings?" "No, sir. Never. I'm so sorry." "Are you aware," he continued, his tone conversational, almost pleasant, "that the information discussed in this room is highly confidential?" Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She could see it in the faces of the other men, the calculation, the assessment of risk. She'd seen too much. She was a liability. "I didn't see anything," she said quickly. "I don't know anything. I'll just go. I'll forget. Sit down." The command cut through her panic like a blade. What? "There's an empty chair." Victor gestured to the end of the table, his expression unreadable. "Sit down." The other men exchanged glances, some confused, others alarmed. The nervous one looked like he might have a stroke. "Sir," he tried again, "this is highly irregular. Marcus." Victor didn't raise his voice, but the single word carried enough weight to flatten mountains. "When I want your opinion, I'll ask for it." Marcus subsided, his jaw tight. Evelyn didn't move. Every instinct told her this was a trap, a game she didn't understand. But refusing Victor Hale didn't seem like an option that led anywhere good. On shaking legs, she walked to the empty chair and sat down. The leather was soft, expensive. The men around the table watched her like she was a bomb that might detonate. From this angle, she could see the documents more clearly. Shipping routes through ports she recognized. Inventory lists with numbers that didn't quite make sense. Personnel files with red marks next to certain names. "Ms. Carter," Victor said, drawing her attention back to him. "How long have you worked for this company?" 3 years. "And in those 3 years, cleaning these offices every night, I imagine you've seen quite a bit." It wasn't a question. Evelyn's throat felt dry. "I just clean, sir. I don't pay attention." "Don't lie to me." The words were soft, but they landed like a physical blow. Invisible people see everything. That's what makes them valuable. He tilted his head slightly. "Or dangerous." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Evelyn's mind raced. She could keep playing dumb, keep insisting she was just a cleaner who'd made a mistake. But something in Victor's eyes told her he'd already decided she was smarter than that continuing to pretend would only insult him. And insulting him felt like a very bad idea. "I see things," she admitted quietly, "but I've never told anyone. It's not my business." "What things?" The question felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. "Discrepancies," she said carefully. "In the waste. Documents that get shredded before they should be. Files that disappear from desks overnight. Meetings that happen off calendar." She swallowed. "I learned early that asking questions was a good way to lose my job." "Smart." Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe, or curiosity. "Tell me, Ms. Carter, if you were to look at this company from your unique vantage point, what would you say is its biggest weakness?" The other men shifted uncomfortably. This was a test, Evelyn realized. But a test of what? She thought about lying, giving some generic answer about market competition or operational efficiency. But Victor Hale didn't strike her as a man who appreciated safe answers. "The gap?" she said finally. "Elaborate." Evelyn's fingers twisted together in her lap. "There's what the company says it is. The presentations, the reports, the public image. Clean, efficient, perfect." She paused. "And then there's what I see at 3 a.m, the reality that gets thrown away before daylight." "And what reality is that?" "That perfection is expensive. Someone always pays for it." She looked down at her hands. Usually the people no one's looking at. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush her. Then Victor smiled. It was a small expression, barely a curve of his mouth, but it transformed his face into something almost human. "Gentlemen," he said, still looking at Evelyn, "I believe we've found our missing piece." Marcus looked like he might explode. "Sir, with all due respect, she's a security risk." "She's an observer," Victor corrected. "Someone who's been watching this operation from the instant for 3 years without anyone noticing. That makes her more valuable than any report you've brought me." He turned to Marcus. "When was the last time someone told you the truth about what actually happens in this building?" Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. "Exactly." Victor stood, and the movement drew every eye in the room. "Ms. Carter, I'm going to make you an offer. You can leave this room, return to your cleaning cart, and pretend this conversation never happened. I'll ensure you're well compensated for your discretion." Evelyn's pulse quickened. Or you can stay. Answer some questions. Show me what you've been seeing." His eyes locked onto hers. "But understand, if you choose that door, There's no going back. You'll know things. And people who know things in my world don't get to return to invisibility. It should have been an easy choice. Take the money. Forget. Survive. But Evelyn had spent 3 years being invisible, and 3 years before that at other jobs where she'd learned to swallow her observations and smile. She'd watched corruption from the shadows, seen small cruelties and large injustices, and told herself it wasn't her place to speak. She was so tired of silence. "What kind of questions?" she asked. Victor's smile widened slightly. "The kind no one else will answer honestly." He gestured to one of the men, an older executive with silver hair and cold eyes. "Richard, show her the inventory reports from the Newark facility." Richard hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. Evelyn opened it. Columns of numbers, shipment dates, warehouse locations. It looked like standard logistics data. "Tell me what you see," Victor said. She scanned the pages, her eyes catching on patterns she'd learned to recognize from 3 years of reading discarded documents. "The reported inventory doesn't match the disposal records." "Explain." "You're showing excess product being destroyed quarterly, obsolete materials, failed quality control, damaged goods." She pointed to a line item. "But the volume of industrial waste bins I empty from the Newark liaison office is about 30% of what these numbers suggest. Either the facility is lying about what they're destroying, or they're destroying it somewhere else." The room went very quiet. Richard's face had gone pale. There could be multiple explanations." "Could there?" Victor's voice cut through the excuse like a knife. "Because Ms. Carter just identified a discrepancy in 90 seconds that your department somehow missed for 8 months." "Sir, with all due respect, she's a janitor. She's observant, which is apparently a rare quality." Victor turned back to Evelyn. "What else?" She should have stopped, should have recognized the danger in the way the other men were looking at her, like she was dismantling something they'd carefully built. But Victor Hale was listening, really listening, and some part of her that had been silent for so long couldn't resist speaking. "The personnel rotations are wrong," she said. "In what way?" "The Newark facility runs 3 shifts, but the night shift never has the same crew 2 weeks in a row. The day and evening shifts are stable, but overnight, people disappear from the roster. They're replaced, but the replacements don't stay." She'd seen the names on access logs in the security office trash, had noticed the pattern months ago. "It's like you're cycling through workers deliberately, keeping them from seeing the full picture." Marcus had gone from pale to red. "That's confidential operational information." "That she learned from your trash," Victor said mildly. He looked genuinely pleased. "Continue, Ms. Carter." Evelyn's heart was racing now, adrenaline overriding caution. "The compliance reports are falsified, not all of them, just enough to maintain plausible deniability. Someone's very good at making the numbers look clean while burying the problems deep enough that auditors won't dig." "And how," Victor asked softly, "did you determine that?" "Because I've cleaned your office," Evelyn said. "I've seen the real reports, the ones you read late at night and then lock in your private safe. They don't match what gets distributed to the board." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victor's expression had gone completely still, unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, then he laughed. It was a genuine sound, warm and unexpected, and it seemed to startle the other men as much as it did Evelyn. "Gentlemen," Victor said, still smiling, "I believe we've been operating under a fatal assumption." "Sir?" Marcus ventured. "We assumed that because someone was beneath our notice, they weren't watching us." Victor's eyes never left Evelyn. "We confused invisibility with blindness. That was foolish." He walked around the table, each step measured and deliberate, until he stood beside Evelyn's chair. This close, she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke. "Tell me, Ms. Carter, if you were running this operation, what would you do differently?" It was absurd, dangerous. She was a janitor being asked to critique a mafia empire by the man who ruled it. But she'd already crossed the line. Might as well see where it led. "I'd find out who's profiting from the gap," she said, "between what the company shows and what's real. Because someone is. They always are." "And if that someone was in this room?" Evelyn looked around the table, at the men who'd been watching this exchange with varying degrees of horror and anger. At Marcus, whose nervousness had an edge of desperation. At Richard, whose cold eyes had grown calculating. "Then you have a bigger problem than inventory discrepancies," she said quietly. Victor's smile was razor sharp. "Indeed." He returned to his seat, his movements unhurried, a man completely in control of his domain. "Marcus," he said, "you're dismissed." "But, sir—" "I believe I was clear." Marcus stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked at Evelyn with something close to hatred before stalking from the room. Victor waited until the door closed. "Richard, I want a full audit of Newark by Monday. Actual numbers, not the sanitized version." "If you can't deliver that, I'll find someone who can." Richard's jaw tightened. "Understood. The rest of you, consider this a lesson in observation. You've been so focused on maintaining appearances that you stopped looking at the foundation." He leaned back. "We're done for tonight. Leave the files." The men gathered their things in tense silence, filing out one by one until only Evelyn and Victor remained. The room felt larger without them, more dangerous. "You should fire me," Evelyn said into the quiet. "Why would I do that?" "Because I know too much? Because I'm a liability? Because—" she gestured helplessly at the documents on the table. "Because this isn't a conversation I should have survived." "You're right," Victor agreed. "This is the kind of conversation that usually ends with people disappearing. Do you know why it won't end that way for you?" Evelyn shook her head. "Because you're useful, and I've learned that useful people are far more valuable than silent ones." He stood, gathering the files with efficient movements. "You'll return to your regular duties tonight. Tomorrow, you'll be contacted about a different position." "What kind of position?" "The kind where you keep observing, keep questioning, keep finding the gaps." He locked eyes with her. "But this time, you'll report directly to me." "I don't understand." "You've spent 3 years watching my empire from the shadows, Miss Carter. You've seen the flaws no one else bothers to notice or dares to mention. That makes you either my greatest asset or my greatest threat." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm choosing to believe you're the former. Don't make me regret that choice. And if I say no, then you'll walk out of here with enough money to start over somewhere else, and we'll both pretend this night never happened." His expression hardened. "But I don't think you'll say no." "Why not?" "Because you're tired of being invisible, because you've been watching injustice for years and swallowing your voice, because somewhere inside you there's a part that wants to fix what's broken." He paused. "Am I wrong?" Evelyn thought about lying, about protecting herself the way she'd learned to do. But Victor Hale had seen through every deflection she'd offered. There didn't seem to be much point in pretending now. "No," she admitted. "You're not wrong. Then we understand each other." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Ms. Carter. What I build here, this empire, it exists in shades of gray. There are no heroes in this story. If you choose to stay, you'll be complicit in things that aren't entirely legal or entirely moral. Can you live with that?" Evelyn looked at the documents on the table, at the evidence of corruption and exploitation and careful criminality hidden behind corporate respectability. She thought about the people she'd seen ground down by the machine, the small injustices she'd witnessed and ignored. "Can you?" she asked. Victor smiled, genuine and almost warm. "I suppose we'll find out together." He left, and Evelyn sat alone in the conference room with her cleaning cart and the weight of a choice she'd already made. She'd walked through the wrong door, and nothing would ever be the same. By the time Evelyn finished her shift at 6 a.m., exhaustion had settled into her bones. But her mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying the conversation, analyzing every word, every look, every moment when she should have kept silent and didn't. She took the service elevator down to the basement, retrieved her coat from her locker, and stepped out into the gray morning light of a city waking up. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "A car will pick you up at your apartment at 9 a.m. Bring the notebook." VH, Evelyn's breath caught. She looked down at her worn messenger bag, at the battered spiral notebook she'd kept for 2 years, the one filled with observations she'd told herself were just idle curiosity, patterns in scheduling, discrepancies in inventory, names that appeared and disappeared, questions she'd never voiced. He'd known about it. Somehow, he'd known. Her hands trembled as she typed a response. "What notebook?" The reply was immediate. The one in your bag. The one you think no one knows about. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending it doesn't exist. Evelyn stared at her phone, at the casual display of surveillance and power. Victor Hale had been watching her as carefully as she'd been watching his empire. She should run, should disappear into the millions of anonymous faces in this city and never look back. Instead, she went home, showered, and laid out her best interview clothes. A navy blazer that was only slightly worn, a white blouse, slacks that still had a decent crease. At 8:55 a.m., a black town car pulled up outside her apartment building. The driver was professional, silent, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He opened the rear door without a word. Evelyn clutched her notebook and got in. The drive took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Not to Hale Industries, but to a different building, older, less conspicuous, the kind of place that didn't advertise its importance. They descended into an underground parking garage, took a private elevator up to the 15th floor. The doors opened onto a hallway that looked nothing like corporate America. Dark wood panels. Art that was probably worth more than Evelyn's annual salary. Silence so complete it felt deliberate. The driver led her to a door at the end of the hall and knocked twice. "Come in." Victor's voice, unmistakable. The driver opened the door and stepped aside. Evelyn entered what appeared to be a private office, but not the sanitized corporate space she'd cleaned at Hale Industries. This was personal. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a desk of dark mahogany, windows overlooking the city with a view that must have cost a fortune. Victor stood by those windows, his back to her, hands in his pockets. He wore a different suit today, charcoal gray, but the aura of controlled power remained unchanged. "Close the door," he said without turning. Evelyn obeyed, her heart hammering. "You came. You didn't really give me a choice." "There's always a choice, Ms. Carter." He turned to face her. "You could have run. Most people in your position would have. Most people in my position wouldn't have walked into that meeting in the first place." His mouth curved slightly. "Fair point." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. Show me the notebook." Evelyn sat, pulling the worn spiral from her bag. It felt suddenly precious, dangerous, evidence of 3 years of watching and wondering. Victor took it, flipping through pages filled with her cramped handwriting. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes moved quickly, absorbing everything. "You documented inventory cycles," he said after a long moment. "Yes. Personnel rotations, security patterns, waste disposal volumes." He looked up. "You created a map of my operation from trash and observation." "I told you, invisible people see things." "Indeed." He set the notebook on his desk. "Tell me, why did you keep this? What did you plan to do with it?" Evelyn had asked herself that question 100 times. "I don't know. At first it was just curiosity, puzzle solving. Then it became proof that I wasn't crazy, that the things I noticed were real." She met his eyes. "I never planned to use it. I just needed to know I wasn't imagining the gaps. The gaps between what we show and what we are." "Yes." Victor leaned against his desk, studying her with that unsettling intensity. "You realize this notebook could destroy careers, trigger investigations, unravel carefully constructed legitimacy. I realize it could get me killed. And yet you brought it when I asked. You already knew about it. Lying seemed pointless." He laughed, the sound low and genuine. "You're remarkably practical for someone who just walked into a lion's den." "The den found me first," Evelyn pointed out. "I'm just trying to survive it." "Smart." He pushed off the desk, moving to a cabinet and pouring 2 glasses of something amber. He offered her one. "To survival, then." Evelyn took the glass, though she didn't drink. "What happens now?" "Now, you tell me what you found. Everything in that notebook. I want the full analysis." "Why? You run this empire. You already know." "I know what people tell me, what reports show me, what carefully filtered information makes it to my desk." His eyes were sharp. "But you've been watching the machinery from inside. You've seen what happens when no one thinks they're being observed. That's a different intelligence." Evelyn took a sip of the drink. Whiskey, smooth and expensive. "The Newark facility is running a parallel operation." "Explain." "The official inventory moves through proper channels, but there's a secondary pipeline, smaller, harder to track. Night shift workers who don't stay long enough to ask questions. Waste disposal that doesn't match production volumes. She set down her glass. Someone skimming. Not enough to trigger alarms, but consistently over months. Who? I don't know, but I can tell you it's someone with authority over scheduling, inventory management, and compliance reporting. Someone who can manipulate the data before it reaches you. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Richard, the man from last night? Richard Moss, VP of Operations, 20 years with the company, trusted. The last word carried bitter weight. What else? Evelyn spent the next hour walking him through her observations. The patterns she'd noticed. The discrepancies that had seemed small individually, but added up to something systemic. The careful corruption that had been hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and misdirection. Victor listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, silence filled the office. You've just described a cancer, Victor said finally. Not a single tumor, but metastasis, spread throughout the operation. I'm sorry. Don't be. He turned those storm gray eyes on her. You're not the disease, Ms. Carter. You're the diagnosis, and now we cut it out. We? You didn't think I was going to let you go after this, did you? His smile was sharp. You're far too valuable, and far too dangerous to leave unsupervised. Evelyn's stomach twisted. So I'm a prisoner. You're an asset. There's a difference. He returned to his desk, pulling out a folder. I'm offering you a position, official title, special analyst, reporting directly to me. Unofficial role? You'll continue doing exactly what you've been doing, watching, questioning, finding the gaps. But this time, you'll have authority to investigate, access to files, protection. Protection from what? From the people whose corruption you'll be exposing, from colleagues who won't appreciate scrutiny, from enemies who'll see you as a threat. He slid the folder across the desk. This is a dangerous game, Ms. Carter. People who play it don't always survive. But if you're willing to take the risk, I'll ensure you have the resources to succeed. Evelyn opened the folder. A contract. A salary that was 10 times what she made as a janitor. Benefits. Legal protection. And a non-disclosure agreement that essentially made her property of Victor Hale. If I sign this, I can't leave. If you sign this, you won't want to. He leaned forward. I'm offering you power, Ms. Carter. Real power. The ability to change a broken system from the inside. To hold people accountable who thought they were untouchable. Isn't that what you've wanted? What you've been documenting for 3 years? It was. But wanting something and accepting its price were different things. What if I find corruption that leads to you? Evelyn asked quietly. Victor's expression didn't change. Then you report it, and I'll deal with the consequences. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to test me. That's your job now, questioning everything, trusting nothing but evidence. He stood, extending his hand. Do we have an agreement? Evelyn looked at his hand, at the contract, at the life she was being offered, dangerous, morally complex, impossible to walk away from. She thought about 3 years of silence, of watching injustice and swallowing her voice, of being invisible and powerless and safe. She was so tired of being safe. One condition, she said. Name it. If I find something that needs to change, something broken or corrupt or wrong, you let me fix it, no matter who it implicates. Victor's smile was sharp as broken glass. Ms. Carter, I'm counting on it. She took his hand and signed away her invisibility forever. The contract ink was barely dry when Victor handed Evelyn a key card and a phone. Your office is on the 14th floor of this building, he said, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he handed out life-altering assignments every morning. The phone is secure. Use it for all communication related to your work. Your first assignment is already waiting. Evelyn turned the sleek device over in her hands. It was heavier than her old phone, encrypted, probably monitored. What's the assignment? Newark. Victor's expression hardened. I want a full audit, not the sanitized version Richard will try to feed you. I want the truth. Inventory records, personnel files, security footage for the last 6 months. Find out who's running the secondary operation and how deep it goes. You want me to investigate your VP of operations. I want you to investigate everyone. Richard, his staff, the facility managers, the night shift supervisors. Trust no one. Question everything. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. And Evelyn, be careful. If you're right about the corruption, the people behind it won't appreciate your digging. You think they'll come after me? I think they'll try, which is why you won't be going alone. Victor picked up his phone, typed something quickly. You'll have support, security, access to legal resources, and someone who knows how to navigate the darker corners of this business. Who? The office door opened, and a woman walked in. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in a black pantsuit that somehow managed to look both professional and dangerous. Dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, sharp features, and eyes that assessed Evelyn in a single sweep. There was a gun holster visible beneath her jacket, worn with the casual confidence of someone who used it regularly. This is Diana Reeves, Victor said. She handles sensitive security matters for me. Diana, meet Evelyn Carter. She'll be conducting internal investigations, starting with Newark. Diana's expression remained neutral, but Evelyn caught the flicker of assessment in her eyes. The janitor. Former janitor, Victor corrected. Now she's the person who sees things everyone else misses. I expect you to keep her alive while she does it. Understood. Diana turned to Evelyn. Ground rules, you go nowhere without telling me first. You access no sensitive areas without backup. Someone threatens you, you don't play hero. You call me immediately. Clear? Evelyn bristled at the authoritative tone, but she wasn't stupid enough to argue. Clear. Good. We leave for Newark in 2 hours. Bring your notebook and anything else you need for a deep dive. Diana glanced at Victor. I assume she has full clearance? Everything except my private files. Victor pulled a tablet from his desk drawer, tapped it awake, and handed it to Evelyn. This contains access codes, passwords, security protocols. Memorize what you need, then destroy the data. If someone gets hold of that device, it becomes a weapon. Evelyn took the tablet, feeling the weight of what she'd agreed to settle more firmly on her shoulders. How long do I have? For Newark? As long as it takes to find the truth. But Evelyn... Victor's voice dropped, taking on an edge that made her spine straighten. Once you start pulling threads, the whole fabric might unravel. People will lose their jobs. Some might face criminal charges. A few might try to eliminate the problem before it eliminates them. Are you prepared for that? She thought about the workers she'd seen cycled through night shifts, used and discarded. About the careful manipulation of numbers that hid exploitation. About 3 years of watching injustice and telling herself it wasn't her fight. Yes, she said. I'm prepared. Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Diana, get her set up. I want preliminary findings by end of week. Diana gestured toward the door. Let's go. Evelyn followed her out, clutching the tablet and her notebook like lifelines. The hallway seemed longer than before, each step taking her further from the person she'd been, and closer to something she didn't fully understand yet. In the elevator, Diana broke the silence. You really kept a notebook documenting all their crimes? I documented patterns. I didn't know they were crimes. Bullshit. Diana's tone was almost amused. You're smarter than that. You knew exactly what you were seeing. Evelyn didn't respond. Here's what you need to understand, Diana continued as the elevator descended. Victor Hale doesn't hire people out of kindness. He saw something in you, some combination of observation and courage or stupidity that made him think you were useful. Don't waste it, and don't mistake his interest for protection. You're valuable to him right now, but value is conditional. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to keep you realistic. This world, Diana gestured vaguely at the building around them. It chews up idealists and spits out corpses. If you're going to survive, you need to understand that Victor's empire isn't built on trust. It's built on leverage, fear, and strategic violence. Your job is to be useful enough that eliminating you costs more than keeping you alive. The elevator doors opened onto the parking garage. Diana led her to a black SUV with tinted windows. Get in. We have work to do. The drive to Newark took 90 minutes through dense traffic. Diana spent most of it on her phone, speaking in clipped sentences to people whose names Evelyn didn't recognize. When she wasn't on calls, she was silent, her attention on the road and the mirrors, constantly watching. Evelyn used the time to review the tablet, access codes for facility databases. personnel records going back 5 years, security camera archives, financial reports that showed the official story, and in a separate encrypted folder, what appeared to be Victor's private analysis showing significant discrepancies. He'd known. Maybe not all of it, but enough to suspect that something was wrong. And instead of handling it through official channels, he'd handed it to her. Someone with no corporate experience, no investigative training, nothing but 3 years of watching from the shadows. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like vindication. "We're here," Diana said, pulling into a sprawling industrial complex surrounded by chain-link fencing and security checkpoints. The Newark facility was massive, 6 warehouse buildings, administrative offices, loading docks that never seemed to stop moving. Trucks came and went in carefully orchestrated chaos, and workers in company uniforms moved with the practiced efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were supposed to do and when. Diana flashed credentials at the gate. The guard checked them, checked his computer, then waved them through with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They know we're coming," Evelyn said. "Of course they do. Victor called ahead, told them to expect a corporate audit. They've had 2 hours to hide anything obvious." Diana parked near the main administrative building. "Which means we're not looking for obvious things." "What are we looking for?" "Patterns, inconsistencies, the gaps you're so good at finding." Diana killed the engine. "And we start with the people no one pays attention to." The administrative building was standard corporate architecture. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, motivational posters about teamwork and safety. A receptionist greeted them with professional courtesy, offering coffee and directing them to a conference room where the facility manager was waiting. Paul Hendricks was 53, according to the personnel file Evelyn had memorized. 20 years with the company, steady promotions, exemplary performance reviews. He wore khakis and a company polo, his smile warm but his eyes cautious. "Welcome to Newark," he said, shaking Diana's hand, then Evelyn's. His grip was firm, practiced. "Mr. Hale mentioned you'd be conducting an operational review. We're happy to cooperate in any way we can." "Excellent," Diana said smoothly. "We'll need access to your inventory management system, personnel records, and security footage for the last 6 months." "Of course. I'll have my assistant get you set up." Paul's smile never wavered, but Evelyn caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "May I ask what specifically prompted this review?" "Routine audit," Diana lied easily. "Corporate wants to ensure all facilities are operating at optimal efficiency." "I see. Well, I'm confident you'll find everything in order." He left to arrange their access, and Diana turned to Evelyn. "What did you notice?" "He's nervous, trying to hide it, but his body language is tense." "Good. What else?" Evelyn thought back to the interaction. He asked what prompted the review before offering full cooperation. Most people do it the other way around, cooperate first, ask questions later. He wanted to know what we knew before deciding how to respond. Diana's smile was sharp. "You're learning. Come on." They spent the next 4 hours drowning in data. Personnel records showed exactly what Evelyn had documented. High turnover on night shifts, workers who appeared for a few weeks then vanished from the roster. Inventory reports were meticulous, almost too perfect, with numbers that aligned exactly with projections month after month. "No operation runs this smoothly," Evelyn muttered, cross-referencing shipment dates with disposal records. "There's always variation, damaged goods, shipping delays, quality control failures, but these reports show exactly 0 deviation." "Someone's cooking the books," Diana agreed. "Question is who and why." Evelyn pulled up the security footage archive, scrolling through weeks of loading dock activity. During day shifts, everything looked normal, trucks arriving, workers unloading, materials moving through proper channels. But when she switched to night shift footage, something changed. "Look at this." She pointed at the screen. "Night shift, 2 a.m. That truck isn't on the delivery schedule." Diana leaned in, watching the grainy footage. A semi-truck backed up to Dock 7. Workers unloaded crates, moving them not into the main warehouse but into a smaller auxiliary building. "What's in that building?" Diana asked. Evelyn checked the facility map. "According to records, it's storage for obsolete equipment. Supposed to be mostly empty." "Let's find out if that's true." They left the conference room, Diana moving with purposeful strides that made it clear she wasn't asking permission. Paul intercepted them in the hallway, his professional smile back in place. "Ladies, can I help you find something?" "We'd like to inspect the auxiliary storage building," Diana said. "Dock 7 access." Paul's smile tightened fractionally. "That area is mostly unused. I'm not sure it's relevant to your audit." "Then you won't mind us taking a look?" "Of course not. I'll arrange for someone to unlock it." "That won't be necessary." Diana pulled out a master keycard, one of the access codes Victor had provided. "We have clearance." They walked past Paul, whose expression had gone carefully blank. Evelyn could feel his eyes on their backs, could sense the mental calculations happening behind that professional facade. The auxiliary building was smaller than the main warehouses, older, with minimal lighting. Diana unlocked the door, and they stepped into shadows that smelled of concrete and something chemical, sharp and unpleasant. Evelyn found the light switches. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, revealing rows of industrial shelving. But instead of obsolete equipment, the shelves held crates, dozens of them, stamped with codes that didn't match anything in the official inventory system. Diana pulled out her phone, photographing everything. "This is what they've been hiding." Evelyn moved between the shelves, examining labels, checking serial numbers against the database on her tablet. None of it matched. It was like looking at a ghost inventory, products that existed physically but had no paper trail, no documentation, no official existence. "What is all this?" she whispered. "Contraband, probably, or legitimate product being moved off books." Diana opened one of the crates, revealing electronics, high-end components still in manufacturer packaging. Someone's running a side business, taking company inventory, falsifying disposal records, selling it privately. Richard Moss. Maybe. Or someone working under his authority. Diana closed the crate. "Either way, this is enough to trigger a full investigation. We need to document everything and get out before—" The lights went out. Darkness swallowed them, complete and sudden. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. "Don't move," Diana hissed. There was a soft click, and a flashlight beam cut through the black. "Stay close to me." They moved toward the exit, Diana's hand on her weapon, the flashlight sweeping the shadows. Evelyn's breathing sounded too loud in her own ears, each step an eternity. They were 10 feet from the door when it opened. 3 men stood silhouetted against the exterior light. They weren't wearing company uniforms. One of them held what looked like a tire iron. "You two need to leave," the man with the tire iron said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. "This area is off limits." "We have authorization from Victor Hale," Diana said, her tone deadly calm. "Step aside." "I don't care who authorized you. You're trespassing." Diana's hand moved to her holster. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away. Take it." The men exchanged glances. Then the one with the tire iron took a step forward. Diana drew her weapon in a single fluid motion, the gun leveling at his chest. "I said walk away." Time seemed to freeze. Evelyn could see the calculation in the man's eyes, weighing odds, considering whether corporate security was worth dying for. Finally, he lowered the tire iron. "This isn't over." "No," Diana agreed. "It's not. But it's over for tonight." The men backed away, disappearing into the darkness between buildings. Diana kept her weapon drawn until they were gone, then grabbed Evelyn's arm. "We're leaving, now!" They half ran to the SUV, Diana constantly checking their surroundings. Only when they were back on the highway, miles from the facility, did she holster her gun. "What the hell was that?" Evelyn's voice shook despite her best efforts. "That was a message. Someone knew we were coming, knew what we'd find, and sent muscle to scare us off." Diana's jaw was tight. "Which means we have a leak. Paul Hendricks, probably. Or someone in Victor's inner circle who tipped him off." Diana glanced at Evelyn. "Welcome to the deep end, analyst. Still think you're prepared for this?" Evelyn thought about the men in the darkness, about the casual threat of violence, about how close they'd come to something worse than intimidation. "Yes," she said, surprised to find she meant it. "I'm prepared." Diana actually smiled. "Good, because we're just getting started." They returned to the city after midnight. Diana dropped Evelyn at her apartment with strict instructions to document everything they'd found and send it through encrypted channels. Then she disappeared into the night, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts and the weight of what she'd uncovered. Inside her small apartment, one bedroom, barely furnished, the home of someone who'd spent years being invisible, Evelyn opened her laptop and began to write, not the sanitized corporate language of official reports, but the truth in her own words, what she'd seen, what it meant, who was likely responsible. She worked until dawn, building a case from fragments and observations, connecting dots that others had deliberately obscured. When she finished, the sun was rising over the city, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Evelyn encrypted the document, sent it to Victor's secure server, and collapsed onto her bed. Her phone buzzed 90 minutes later, Victor's number. "I read your report," he said without preamble. "Well done." "Thank you." "How do you feel?" The question surprised her. "Tired. Angry. Certain." "Certain of what?" "That I was right. That the corruption goes deeper than inventory theft. That people are being used and discarded to maintain someone's profit margin." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "And that I want to tear it all down." Victor was quiet for a moment. "Be careful, Evelyn. Righteous anger is useful, but it can also be blinding. We're not trying to destroy the system. We're trying to excise the cancer while keeping the body alive." "Is there a difference?" "Yes. One is justice. The other is vengeance. Know which one you're pursuing." "What about you? Which one are you pursuing?" "Control," Victor said simply. "I built this empire to operate according to specific rules. When people break those rules, they undermine everything. Richard Moss, if he's behind this, didn't just steal from me. He betrayed the structure. That's unforgivable." "What happens to him?" "That depends on what else you find. Right now, you've proven inventory manipulation and off-books operations. That's enough to start formal proceedings, but I need to know scope. How many people are involved? How long it's been running? Whether it's contained to Newark or spread across other facilities. You want me to keep digging. I want you to finish what you started. Diana will arrange access to our other major operations. Philadelphia, Boston, Atlanta. Same process. Find the gaps. Document everything. Build a case that can't be ignored or explained away." Evelyn thought about the men in the darkness, about the casual threat of violence. "Someone tried to scare us off last night." "I know. Diana briefed me. That's why you'll have increased security for all future site visits. And Evelyn," his voice hardened, "if anyone threatens you again, they'll answer to me personally. You're under my protection now. That means something." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like chains, binding her more tightly to a world she was only beginning to understand. "I'll start with Philadelphia tomorrow," she said. "Good. Send me daily updates. And Evelyn? Trust your instincts. They've served you well so far." He ended the call, leaving Evelyn sitting in her tiny apartment with the sunrise and the knowledge that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. Her old life, invisible, safe, powerless, was gone. What remained was uncertain, dangerous, and entirely her choice. She showered, changed into clean clothes, and called Diana. "Philadelphia," she said when the security chief answered. "When do we leave?" Diana's laugh was low and approving. 2 hours. I'll pick you up." The Philadelphia facility was larger than Newark, more modern, with better security and a management team that seemed genuinely surprised by the audit. Evelyn and Diana spent 3 days there, reviewing records, interviewing staff, examining inventory flows, and found nothing. The numbers aligned. Personnel records showed normal turnover rates. Inventory matched disposal records. Even the night shift operations ran clean. "It's too clean," Evelyn said on their last evening, staring at spreadsheets that refused to show her what she was looking for. "After Newark, I expected to find similar patterns, but there's nothing." Diana leaned back in her chair, studying the data over Evelyn's shoulder. Maybe Newark was an isolated incident, one bad actor, one corrupted facility. Or maybe whoever's running this operation is smarter than we thought. Maybe they know we're looking now, and they've covered their tracks. Evelyn pulled up personnel records, cross-referencing names between facilities. "Diana, look at this." She pointed to a name that appeared on both Newark and Philadelphia rosters. Marcus Hale, the nervous young executive from the initial meeting, the one Victor had dismissed. "Victor's nephew," Diana said quietly. "He rotates between facilities as part of his management training. and he was at Newark during the 6 months when the ghost inventory started accumulating. Then he transferred to Philadelphia 3 months ago. Evelyn pulled up Philadelphia's records from before Marcus's arrival. Look at the disposal reports from 8 months ago. Normal variation, occasional discrepancies. Then Marcus arrives and suddenly everything's perfect. Too perfect. He's cleaning up the evidence. Or he was involved from the start and got smart after Newark. Evelyn sat back, her mind racing. Diana, what if Richard Moss isn't the architect? What if he's just part of it? You think Victor's nephew is running a theft operation under his nose? I think someone young and ambitious, someone with family connections that make him feel untouchable, might be exactly arrogant enough to try. Evelyn pulled up Marcus's complete file. Good education, fast promotions, glowing reviews from everyone except Victor himself. And I think he'd be smart enough to recruit people like Richard Moss, established executives who could provide cover and legitimacy. Diana pulled out her phone. I need to call Victor. Wait. Evelyn grabbed her arm. If we're wrong, we just accused his nephew of major crimes based on circumstantial evidence. If we're right, and Marcus has family leverage, Victor might not be able to act on it. Either way, we need more proof. What kind of proof? Evelyn thought about the men in the darkness at Newark, about the careful way Marcus had watched her during that first meeting, about the way he'd objected to her presence with the desperation of someone protecting something valuable. I need to talk to the night shift workers, she said, the ones who got cycled out of Newark. If Marcus was running the operation, someone must have seen something. We just need to find them and get them to talk. That could take weeks. And if Marcus realizes what you're doing, then we'll know for sure he's involved, because he'll try to stop us. Evelyn met Diana's eyes. I'm not wrong about this. I can feel it. Diana studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we do this your way, but if anything feels wrong, if you get even a hint of danger, you tell me immediately. Agreed. They returned to the city that night, and Evelyn spent the next week tracking down former Newark employees. Most had moved on to other jobs scattered across the region. Some refused to talk. Others claimed they'd seen nothing unusual. But on day 6, she found someone willing to speak. His name was James Torres, 29, former night shift supervisor who'd worked at Newark for 8 months before being abruptly transferred to a facility in Baltimore. When Evelyn finally reached him by phone, his first question was whether the call was being recorded. No, she promised. This conversation stays between us. Who are you really? James's voice was tight with suspicion. Because if you're corporate, I've got nothing to say. I'm someone who's trying to figure out what really happened at Newark, someone who thinks employees were being used and discarded to cover up crimes. She paused. And I think you saw something that got you removed before you could ask questions. Silence stretched across the line. Then, quietly, yeah, I saw something. Tell me. There was a truck, came every Tuesday and Thursday, around 2 a.m., never on the official schedule, but the day manager, Marcus something, young guy, always acted like he owned the place. He'd tell us to process whatever came off that truck as routine intake. Evelyn's pulse quickened. What was on the truck? Electronics, mostly. High-end stuff. We'd log it into a separate system, not the main inventory database. Then a week later, it would go right back out on another unscheduled truck. We weren't supposed to ask questions. But you did. I mentioned it to my supervisor, said it seemed weird that we were moving product that never hit official inventory. 2 days later, I got transferred to Baltimore. James's voice hardened. That was 6 months ago. I've been waiting for someone to ask me what I saw. Figured eventually someone would notice the discrepancy. Someone did, Evelyn said. James, would you be willing to make an official statement? To who? Corporate? They're the ones running the operation. To Victor Hale directly. Another pause. The CEO? He's the one who ordered this investigation. He wants the truth, regardless of who it implicates. Even if it's his own nephew? So James knew, or suspected. Especially then, Evelyn said, hoping she was right. All right, James said finally. I'll talk, but I want protection. If I'm testifying against people running an operation this big, I need guarantees. You'll have them. I'll arrange everything. She ended the call and immediately contacted Victor. He answered on the first ring. Tell me you have something. I have a witness, former Newark supervisor who can testify that Marcus was directing off-books inventory movement. He's willing to make an official statement in exchange for protection. The silence that followed felt weighted with something Evelyn couldn't quite identify. Then Victor spoke, his voice carefully controlled. You're certain it's Marcus. The evidence points to him. Multiple facilities, same pattern, always starting or intensifying after his arrival. Personnel who ask questions get transferred or removed, and now we have someone who can place him at the center of it. Evelyn took a breath. Victor, I know he's family, but family doesn't grant immunity from consequences. Victor cut her off, his tone cold. If Marcus has been stealing from this company, betraying the structure I built, then he answers for it. Set up the interview with your witness. I'll handle the rest. What does that mean? It means Marcus will be brought in for questioning, formally, with legal representation present, because despite everything, he's still entitled to due process. Victor's voice softened slightly. You did good work, Evelyn. Dangerous work, but good. There's more, she said. If Marcus was running this operation, he wasn't doing it alone. Richard Moss, possibly others. We need to identify everyone involved before anyone has a chance to destroy evidence or disappear. Agreed. Come to my office tomorrow morning. We'll coordinate next steps. Evelyn arrived at Victor's private office at 8 a.m., carrying a folder thick with documentation, personnel records, inventory analyses, interview notes, security footage screenshots. Diana was already there, along with two men Evelyn didn't recognize. One was older, gray-haired, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in law enforcement. The other was younger, sharp-eyed, holding a legal pad. Evelyn Carter, meet Robert Chen, my head of internal security, and Thomas Wright, chief legal counsel. Victor made the introductions with efficiency. They'll be handling the formal investigation from here. I need you to brief them on everything you've found. For the next 3 hours, Evelyn walked them through her findings. Chen asked pointed questions about evidence chains and witness credibility. Wright took meticulous notes, occasionally interjecting with legal considerations. When she finished, Chen leaned back in his chair. This is solid work. Circumstantial in places, but the pattern is clear. Combined with Torres's testimony, we have enough to initiate formal proceedings. Against Marcus alone, or the wider network? Victor asked. Both. We move on everyone simultaneously. Marcus, Richard Moss, Paul Hendricks at Newark, and anyone else the investigation identifies. No warnings, no chance to coordinate stories or destroy evidence. Chen looked at Victor. But you need to understand what this means. Marcus's family. This will have consequences beyond the legal ones. I'm aware. Victor's expression was unreadable. Do it anyway. When? Wright asked. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Simultaneous raids at all implicated facilities, with full documentation and legal authority. Victor turned to Evelyn. You'll be present for Marcus's interview. I want him to see the person who uncovered his operation. I want him to understand that invisibility doesn't mean blindness. The words sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. Not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. She'd spent years watching from shadows. Tomorrow, she'd step fully into the light, and there would be no going back. I'll be ready, she said. The raids happened with precision that spoke of careful planning. At 6 a.m. across 4 facilities, teams of internal security and legal representatives descended simultaneously, sealing buildings and securing evidence before anyone could react. Evelyn stood in Victor's office at corporate headquarters, watching through one-way glass as Marcus Hale was escorted into an interview room. He looked younger than she remembered, his confidence stripped away by the sudden reversal of fortune. When Diana and Robert Chen entered the room, he barely glanced at them. Then Evelyn walked in. Marcus's eyes widened. You, the fucking janitor! Special analyst, Evelyn corrected, taking a seat across from him. She placed her folder on the table between them. You remember me then? I remember thinking you were a security risk. Guess I was right. Marcus's attempt at bravado fell flat. This is harassment. I want my lawyer. Your lawyer is on his way, Chen said calmly. But we're going to have a conversation first, about Newark. About inventory that doesn't exist on paper but fills an entire warehouse. About night shift workers who got transferred when they asked inconvenient questions. Marcus's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Evelyn opened the folder, sliding a photograph across the table. Security footage showing Marcus at Newark, directing workers to process an off-schedule delivery. This is you, 2 months ago. That truck, she pointed to the semi in the background, isn't on any delivery manifest. The product that came off it never entered official inventory. Where did it go, Marcus? You can't prove anything with a photograph. You're right. A photograph alone isn't proof. Evelyn pulled out another document. But this is personnel records showing that every facility you've managed experiences the same pattern. Perfect inventory reports, high night shift turnover, and mysterious disposal rates that don't match actual waste volume. Coincidence? I'm being set up. By who? By the workers you transferred? By the supervisors you silenced? By the meticulous records you thought no one would ever look at closely enough to see the pattern? Evelyn leaned forward. I looked, Marcus. I saw every gap, every discrepancy, every carefully hidden lie, and now everyone else sees it too. The door opened, and a man in an expensive suit entered, Marcus's lawyer, presumably. He took one look at the document spread across the table and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Don't say another word. Smart advice, Chen agreed, because anything you say now will be used in formal proceedings. Richard Moss is being interviewed as we speak. So is Paul Hendricks. So are a dozen other people connected to this operation. Someone's going to talk, Marcus. Someone's going to cut a deal. The question is whether it's going to be you. Marcus looked at his lawyer, who gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. I have nothing to say. Then this interview is over. Chen gathered the documents. Evelyn, let's go. They left Marcus sitting in the interview room. His confident facade finally cracked, revealing the frightened young man beneath. In the hallway, Victor was waiting. Well? He asked. He's not talking, Chen reported, but we don't need him to. We have Torres's testimony, the security footage, the documentary evidence. It's enough. Victor nodded slowly, his expression carved from stone. Process him like anyone else. No special treatment because of family. If he's guilty, he faces the consequences. Understood. Victor turned to Evelyn. Walk with me. They moved through the building in silence, taking an elevator down to the parking garage. Only when they were alone did Victor speak. That must have felt satisfying, confronting the person who tried to silence you. It felt necessary, Evelyn corrected. Not satisfying, just necessary. Good answer. Victor stopped beside his car, turning to face her. You've uncovered systematic corruption, identified the perpetrators, and built a case that will result in multiple prosecutions. You've done exactly what I hired you to do. So why do you look troubled? Because Evelyn was troubled. Because she'd just helped destroy the career, possibly the freedom, of Victor's own nephew. Because the power she'd been given felt less like justice and more like a weapon she didn't fully understand how to wield. What happens now? She asked instead. Now? The system works. Marcus will be formally charged along with everyone else involved. They'll have their day in court. The facilities will be cleaned up, new management installed, protocols tightened. Victor paused. And you'll move on to the next investigation. Because if Newark wasn't isolated, if corruption exists at this level, it likely exists elsewhere too. You're asking me to keep digging. I'm asking you to do what you're good at, finding truth in the gaps between appearance and reality. He met her eyes. Unless you want to stop. Unless this is too much. Evelyn thought about James Torres, about the workers cycled through night shifts so they wouldn't see too much, about the system that had protected people like Marcus while grinding down everyone beneath them. No, she said, I don't want to stop. Victor smiled, brief and genuine. Then we're just getting started. He drove away, leaving Evelyn standing in the concrete shadows of the parking garage, holding power she'd never imagined and responsibility that felt like gravity, pulling her down into depths she couldn't yet see the bottom of. Her phone buzzed. Diana. Richard Moss just confessed, gave up names, dates, financial records. The whole operation's unraveling. Good. You should go home, get some rest. Tomorrow we start on Atlanta. Evelyn ended the call and walked to her car. Not the beat-up sedan she'd driven as a janitor, but the company vehicle that had come with her new position. Sleek, dark, anonymous. She drove through the city as dawn broke, watching the world wake up, and wondered if the people in those buildings had any idea what kind of empire they worked for, what kind of corruption existed beneath the polished surface. Probably not. Probably they were like she'd been, invisible, focused on survival, telling themselves that what they didn't know couldn't hurt them. But Evelyn knew now, knew too much to ever go back to that comfortable ignorance. She'd walked through the wrong door and found a world built on shadows and secrets. And instead of running, she'd chosen to stay and tear down the curtains, forcing everyone to see what had always been there. The question wasn't whether she could handle it. The question was what kind of person it would turn her into. 3 weeks after Marcus Hale's arrest, Evelyn sat in a sterile conference room watching her former world collapse through testimony and evidence. The formal hearings had begun, and what had started as an investigation into inventory theft had metastasized into something far darker. Richard Moss, granted immunity in exchange for cooperation, detailed a network that stretched across 8 facilities and involved 23 employees at various levels. The ghost inventory operation had been running for nearly 2 years, siphoning millions in product that was then sold through shadow channels. But that was just the surface. The inventory was almost incidental, Richard said, his voice hollow as he read from prepared testimony. His lawyer sat beside him, stone-faced. Marcus needed the cash flow to fund other operations, ones that Victor Hale would never have approved. Thomas Wright, leading the legal proceedings, leaned forward. What operations? Labor manipulation. We'd bring in workers on temporary contracts, promise them permanent positions, then cycle them out before they qualified for benefits or protections. The turnover kept costs down and prevented anyone from seeing the full picture of what we were moving. Richard's hands trembled slightly. Some of them were undocumented. Marcus knew they couldn't complain without risking deportation. The room went silent. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known about the high turnover, had documented it, but she'd thought it was just covering the theft. This was exploitation at a level that made her earlier discoveries seem almost quaint. Did Victor Hale know about the labor practices? Wright asked. No, Marcus was careful to keep it compartmentalized. He had authority over facility operations, and Victor trusted family to operate within established parameters. Richard looked directly at the camera recording the testimony. Victor built an empire on specific rules. Marcus broke every single one of them. After the session ended, Evelyn found herself standing outside the building, breathing cold autumn air and trying to process what she'd heard. Diana emerged a few minutes later, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering one to Evelyn. "I thought I was investigating theft, corporate corruption, clean, white-collar crime." Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Not human exploitation." That's the thing about pulling threads. You never know what's going to unravel. Diana took a sip of her coffee. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know. I keep thinking about those workers, people who came here hoping for stability, who got used and discarded. And I saw it. I documented the turnover, the patterns, but I didn't dig deep enough to understand what it really meant." "You found the truth. That's what Victor hired you to do." "Did I? Or did I just scratch the surface while people suffered?" Evelyn turned to Diana. "How many workers were cycled through? How many are still out there, afraid to come forward because of their immigration status?" "Robert Chen's team is working on that. They're offering amnesty to anyone who testifies, promising protection regardless of documentation status." Diana's expression softened slightly. "You can't save everyone, Evelyn. Sometimes you can only expose the system and hope it leads to change. That's not enough." "Maybe not, but it's what we have." Evelyn's phone buzzed. Victor's number, requesting her presence at his private office. She finished her coffee, told Diana she'd check in later, and made the drive across the city to the building that had become her second home. Victor was standing by his windows when she arrived, looking out at the skyline with an expression she couldn't read. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door," he said quietly. She obeyed, moving into the room but keeping distance between them. Something about his stillness felt dangerous. "I watched Richard's testimony," Victor continued, still facing the windows. "Every word, every detail about what my nephew built using my company's resources and my family name." Now he turned, and Evelyn saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not anger, but something colder. Disappointment, maybe. Or betrayal. He didn't just steal money, Evelyn. He corrupted the foundation. I know. Do you? Victor moved to his desk, pulling out a folder. Because I'm not sure you understand what this means. Marcus violated every principle this organization was built on. We operate in gray areas, yes. We bend laws and exploit loopholes. But we don't break people. We don't traffic in human suffering. That's the line. He threw the folder onto his desk with enough force to scatter papers. Evelyn had never seen him lose control, even fractionally. I trusted him, Victor said, his voice tight. I gave him opportunities, authority, my name, and he used all of it to build something vile right under my nose. He looked at Evelyn. How did I miss it? The question hung between them, raw and genuine. For the first time since she'd met him, Victor Hale looked less like an untouchable crime lord and more like a man confronting his own blind spots. Because you trusted family, Evelyn said carefully. And because Marcus was smart enough to hide it beneath layers of bureaucracy and legitimate operations. He knew how the system worked because you taught him. He just used that knowledge to subvert it. That's not an excuse. No, but it's an explanation. Evelyn moved closer. Victor, you hired me to find the truth. I found it. What you do with that truth, how you respond to it, that's what defines whether this empire is worth saving. Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he sat down, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. What would you do? He asked. If you were in my position. I'm not... Hypothetically. You've spent 3 weeks uncovering systematic corruption. You've identified perpetrators, documented crimes, destroyed the career of someone you were supposed to trust. What comes next? Evelyn thought about the workers who'd been exploited, about the systems that had enabled it, about the choice between vengeance and actual change. I'd find every worker who was victimized and make it right, she said. Not through legal settlements that require silence, real restitution, jobs, immigration assistance, compensation for what they lost. I'd turn the exposure of this operation into something that actually helps people. That would cost millions, and it would essentially be admitting corporate liability. Yes, it would also be the right thing to do. Victor leaned back, a slight smile touching his lips. You're either very brave or very naive. Maybe both. I'm going to do it, he said, surprising her. Not because it's good business or because it protects the company, but because you're right. This is the moment that defines what kind of empire this is. And I refuse to be the man who built his fortune on broken people. He pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly, then set it aside. I'm establishing a victim compensation fund. 10 million, administered independently, with priority given to workers who were exploited through Marcus's operations. Robert Chen will coordinate identification and outreach. No one will be deported or punished for coming forward. Victor. Additionally, he continued, we're implementing new labor oversight protocols across all facilities, third-party audits quarterly, anonymous reporting systems, mandatory documentation of all personnel changes. If corruption like this exists anywhere else in my organization, I want it found and eliminated. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, not quite hope, but the possibility of it. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, because the next part you're not going to like. Victor's expression hardened. Marcus's trial is in 6 weeks. The prosecution wants you to testify. Full testimony about how you discovered the operation, what you found, how you built the case. You'll be cross-examined by his defense team, who will try to discredit you as an unreliable witness with an agenda. I don't have an agenda. You have the truth. To some people, that's worse. He stood, moving around the desk to stand directly in front of her. They'll dig into your background, your employment history, your finances. They'll paint you as someone with a grudge against management, someone who manufactured evidence to justify your own advancement. Can you handle that? Evelyn thought about standing in a courtroom, facing lawyers whose job was to tear her apart, about having her entire life examined and twisted to serve a narrative she couldn't control. I can handle it, she said, because everything I found is documented. The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence can be challenged. Testimony can be impeached. What can't be shaken is your certainty. Victor's eyes locked onto hers. When you stand in that courtroom, you need to be absolutely sure of what you saw and what it means, because the moment you hesitate, they'll use it to destroy your credibility. I won't hesitate. Good. He returned to his desk, pulling out another folder, thinner this time. Then you should see this before you commit to testifying. Evelyn opened the folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance images taken at various facilities, Marcus meeting with people she didn't recognize, Richard Moss in conversations that looked tense, urgent, and in several images, a figure she hadn't expected to see. Paul Hendricks. But not at Newark, at corporate headquarters, entering Victor's building late at night. I don't understand, Evelyn said. Paul Hendricks has been feeding information to someone inside corporate leadership, someone who knew about the investigation from the beginning and has been systematically warning the people involved. Victor's voice was ice. Your raid at Newark? Those men who confronted you? They knew you were coming because Paul warned them. Richard's initial resistance to the audit? He'd been coached on what to say. The whole operation nearly collapsed because we have a leak at the highest level. Evelyn's mind raced, connecting dots. Who? That's what I need you to find out. Victor pulled up surveillance footage on his computer, showing Paul entering the building, taking an elevator to the executive floors. He's meeting someone regularly, always late at night, always off record. I have timestamps, but not identification. Security footage shows him entering a specific office, but the camera angle doesn't reveal which one. You want me to investigate your own executives. I want you to find the traitor before they destroy what's left of this organization. Victor's expression was granite. Marcus's operation succeeded because someone protected it from the inside. Someone with enough authority to redirect audits, suppress reports, and maintain the illusion of legitimacy. Find them. Oh, that could be anyone on the executive floor. 10 different offices, dozens of people. So start eliminating suspects. Use the same skills that uncovered Newark. Watch, document, find the gaps. He closed the surveillance footage. But Evelyn, understand something. Whoever this is, they're smart enough to have evaded detection for 2 years. They're connected enough to access confidential information. And they're desperate enough to have enabled human exploitation to protect their position. That makes them dangerous. More dangerous than Marcus? Marcus was ambitious and reckless. This person is calculating and patient. Yes, more dangerous. Victor met her eyes, which is why I'm giving you a choice. You can testify at Marcus's trial, help close that case, and walk away from all of this with a clean conscience and a generous severance. Or you can stay, dig deeper, and help me cut out the cancer completely. But you can't do both. The trial preparation will consume you for weeks, and by the time it's over, the trail will be cold. It was the first time Victor had offered her an exit that felt genuine. A real choice, not coercion or manipulation. Evelyn thought about the workers who'd been exploited, about the systems that had enabled it, about the person somewhere in this building who'd protected criminals for profit. If I walk away, who investigates the leak? She asked. Robert Chen, Diana, people with training and experience in this kind of work? Will they find them? Victor hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. Eventually, maybe. That's not good enough. Evelyn closed the folder. I'll stay. I'll find them. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Victor smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. You're learning. The investigation into the corporate leak became Evelyn's consuming focus. She spent days reviewing security footage, cross-referencing executive calendars, tracking movement patterns through the building. Diana provided support, teaching her surveillance techniques and how to identify suspicious behavior. But the more Evelyn dug, the more the suspects seemed to multiply rather than narrow. There was Elizabeth Park, CFO, who'd signed off on budgets that allocated funds to Marcus's facilities without questioning the numbers. But she also signed off on hundreds of budgets monthly, and her approval could have been routine rather than complicit. James Morrison, VP of Human Resources, who'd approved the personnel transfers that silenced questioning workers. But again, he approved thousands of transfers annually, and the paperwork Marcus submitted would have looked legitimate. Sandra Chen, Chief Compliance Officer, Robert's sister, which made the potential betrayal even more painful, who'd reviewed audit reports and marked Newark as low priority. But she reviewed dozens of facilities, and Newark's falsified records would have appeared clean to cursory examination. Any of them could be the leak. Or none of them. Or someone else entirely that Evelyn hadn't even considered. 3 weeks into the investigation, she was no closer to answers. The trial date approached, and the prosecution kept calling, asking when she'd commit to testimony preparation. Evelyn kept deflecting, buying time she wasn't sure how to use. Then Diana found something. Financial records, she said, spreading documents across Evelyn's desk late one night. They were alone in the office, the building dark and quiet around them. I've been tracking unusual transactions, large cash withdrawals, unexplained expenses, anything that might indicate someone being paid to provide information. And? Nothing obvious, but look at this. Diana pointed to a series of expense reports from 6 months prior. Elizabeth Park took 3 trips to Newark, all overnight stays, all billed as routine facility oversight. But here's the thing. CFOs don't typically conduct on-site facility oversight. That's operations territory. Evelyn studied the dates. They corresponded to periods when Marcus's operation had ramped up significantly. She was coordinating with him. Maybe. Or maybe she was conducting legitimate financial reviews. Diana pulled up more records. But then there's this. After each trip, there's a corresponding withdrawal from a discretionary account she controls. $50,000 coded as consultant fees. For what consultant? No name? No invoice? Just the code and the withdrawal. Diana met Evelyn's eyes. That's not standard procedure. That's someone hiding a payment. Can we trace where the money went? That's the problem. Cash withdrawals leave no paper trail. Once it's out of the account, it's ghost money. Diana sat back. But I can tell you this. Those withdrawals started 18 months ago, right when Marcus's operation was being established, and they've continued monthly since then. Evelyn felt the pieces clicking together. She's been funding him, or taking a cut. Either way, she's involved. We need more than circumstantial evidence. We need proof of direct contact, documented coordination, something that puts her in the same room as Marcus discussing the operation. The surveillance footage. Paul Hendricks entering the building late at night. Evelyn pulled up the files Victor had given her, examining the timestamps more carefully. Diana, what floor is Elizabeth Park's office on? 62. Evelyn checked the elevator records. Paul had gone to the 62nd floor on every visit. The timeline fit perfectly. We need to confront her, Evelyn said. With what? Financial anomalies and circumstantial timing? Diana shook her head. She'll lawyer up immediately, claim the withdrawals were legitimate, and walk. We need a confession or hard evidence. Then we get one. Evelyn stood, pacing. Paul Hendricks is scared. Richard already flipped. If we approach Paul, offer him the same deal, immunity in exchange for testimony, he might give us what we need. That's Victor's call, not ours. Then let's talk to Victor. They found him still in his office at midnight, working through documents with the obsessive focus that seemed to drive him. When they presented their findings, he listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. You think Elizabeth has been financing Marcus's operation and providing internal protection? He said when they finished. Yes, Evelyn confirmed. The financial irregularities, the facility visits, the meeting with Paul Hendricks, it all points to her. Elizabeth Park has been with this company for 15 years. She built our financial infrastructure from the ground up. She's one of the few people I actually trust. Victor's tone was flat, emotionless. And you're telling me she's a traitor? I'm telling you the evidence suggests it. Whether that makes her a traitor or just someone who made terrible choices, that's for you to decide. Victor was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread across his desk. Then he picked up his phone. Robert, I need you to bring in Paul Hendricks for questioning. Tonight. Full immunity offer on the table in exchange for complete cooperation. He listened to whatever response came through, then added, and I need complete surveillance on Elizabeth Park. Phone records, computer access, movement tracking, everything. As of right now, she's a suspect in conspiracy charges. He ended the call and looked at Evelyn. If you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong. If you are, he continued, his voice hardening, you'll have destroyed the career of an innocent woman and damaged one of the few functional relationships I have left in this organization. Can you live with that possibility? Can you live with letting a traitor continue operating if I'm right? Victor's smile was sharp and humorless. Touché. Paul Hendricks broke within an hour of questioning. Robert Chen played him footage of the meetings with Elizabeth, presented the timeline of warnings that had allowed people to destroy evidence, and offered immunity in exchange for testimony. Paul, who'd been a facility manager trying to climb the corporate ladder and had gotten in too deep, gave them everything. Elizabeth Park had approached him 2 years ago with an opportunity. Marcus needed someone on the ground who could facilitate operations and provide early warning of any oversight. In exchange, Paul would receive quarterly bonuses and a promotion track that bypassed normal evaluation processes. All he had to do was look the other way, move a few shipments, and report any unusual interest from corporate. When Evelyn's investigation began, Elizabeth had contacted Paul immediately, warning him to clean up anything obvious and prepare responses to deflect scrutiny. The men who'd confronted Evelyn and Diana at Newark had been hired specifically to scare them off, with Elizabeth providing the funds. She told me no one would get hurt, Paul said, his voice breaking. She said it was just inventory management, creative accounting. I didn't know about the labor exploitation until Richard's testimony. I swear I didn't know. Whether that was true or convenient didn't matter. What mattered was that Paul's testimony, combined with the financial records and surveillance footage, gave them enough to move against Elizabeth Park. Victor made the call himself at 4 a.m., requesting Elizabeth's presence at his office immediately for an urgent financial matter. She arrived within the hour, dressed impeccably despite the early morning summons, her expression concerned but composed. Evelyn watched from the observation room as Elizabeth entered Victor's office, as Robert Chen and Thomas Wright followed her in, as the door closed and the interrogation began. Elizabeth, Victor said, his tone almost gentle, we need to discuss some irregularities in the discretionary accounts. Of course. What irregularities? Her composure was perfect, the slight confusion in her voice entirely believable. Cash withdrawals, $50,000 monthly for the past 18 months, coded as consultant fees but with no supporting documentation. Victor slid a folder across his desk. Can you explain these? Elizabeth opened the folder, reviewed the documents, and set them down with a small sigh. These were payments to a consulting firm that was helping us evaluate facility cost structures. I kept the arrangement confidential because I wanted to ensure objective analysis without internal politics influencing the results. What firm? Morrison Strategic Consulting. Small outfit, very specialized. And you have contracts with this firm? Invoices? Reports of their findings? Elizabeth hesitated for just a fraction of a second. The contracts are in my private files. I can retrieve them. Please do. Victor's expression never changed. While you're explaining, perhaps you can also clarify why you made 3 overnight trips to Newark during the period when Marcus Hale was establishing his unauthorized operations. The slight hesitation became a pause. Elizabeth's composure cracked at the edges. I conduct facility oversight regularly. Newark is one of our largest operations. CFOs don't typically conduct on-site facility oversight, Victor said, echoing Diana's earlier observation. That's operations territory. Yet you went personally, stayed overnight, met privately with Marcus. Why? I was conducting financial audits. You were coordinating with him. Victor's voice dropped, losing the gentle tone and turning to ice. You knew about the ghost inventory. You knew about the labor exploitation. You protected it, funded it, and when someone started asking questions, you tried to bury the investigation. Elizabeth stood abruptly. I want my lawyer. Sit down. The command in Victor's voice was absolute. Elizabeth sat, her hands shaking slightly. You've been with this company for 15 years. You've built systems, managed resources, earned trust, and you used all of it to betray everything we built. Why? I didn't betray anything. Paul Hendricks gave a full statement. Financial records show the pattern. Surveillance footage places you in meetings with him late at night, coordinating warnings and suppressing evidence. Victor leaned forward. You enabled the systematic exploitation of vulnerable workers for profit. You helped Marcus build something vile and protected it from exposure. That's not a financial irregularity, Elizabeth. That's conspiracy to commit multiple felonies. The room went silent. Elizabeth's composure finally shattered completely, her professional mask falling away to reveal something desperate beneath. He was family, she said finally. her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus was your nephew. I thought you'd protect him regardless. I thought if I helped him succeed, you'd see it as loyalty to the family. Loyalty to family doesn't include enabling human trafficking. It wasn't trafficking. What would you call it? Victor's voice cut like a blade. Bringing in undocumented workers, promising them stability, then discarding them before they could claim protections? Using their immigration status as leverage to prevent complaints? That's exploitation at best, trafficking at worst. Elizabeth's hands twisted in her lap. I didn't know about that part. Marcus told me it was just inventory management, creative sourcing. By the time I realized how far it had gone, I was too implicated to stop it. So you protected it instead. You silenced investigations, funded cover-ups, and nearly got people killed trying to keep it hidden. Victor stood, moving to stare out his windows at the city waking up below. You had a choice at every step. You chose wrong. What happens now? Elizabeth's voice was hollow. Now you provide a full statement detailing your involvement, Marcus's operations, and anyone else who was complicit. You cooperate completely with the prosecution, and you pray that the judge shows more mercy than I'm inclined to offer. And if I don't? Victor turned to face her. Then I ensure that every detail of your involvement becomes public record. Your reputation, your career, your freedom, all of it burns. The choice is yours. Elizabeth looked at Robert Chen, at Thomas Wright, at the evidence spread across Victor's desk. Then she looked at Victor, and whatever she saw in his eyes made her decision. I'll cooperate, she whispered. Robert Chen opened his briefcase, pulling out recording equipment. Let's begin. Evelyn left the observation room and walked through the empty building, processing what she'd witnessed. Elizabeth Park's confession changed everything. It expanded the case, added another name to the list of people who'd enabled suffering for profit, and confirmed that the corruption had reached the highest levels of the organization. But it also meant something else. It meant Victor had been right to trust Evelyn's instincts. Right to give her authority to question anyone, investigate everything, follow evidence wherever it led. And in doing so, he'd proven something about himself. That loyalty had limits, that trust was conditional, and that when pushed, he would choose justice over comfort. She found herself on the roof of the building, watching sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber. The air was cold, sharp, clearing her head after hours of interrogation and revelation. The door opened behind her. Victor. You should be sleeping, he said, moving to stand beside her at the railing. So should you. Sleep is a luxury we've forfeited. He was quiet for a moment, watching the city. Elizabeth's statement fills in the gaps. She's naming names, providing documentation, confirming what we suspected. The case against Marcus just got ironclad. That's good. Is it? Because I'm not sure I feel good about anything right now. Victor's voice was tired in a way she'd never heard before. I built this empire to operate according to rules, to exist in moral gray areas, yes, but with limits, lines that couldn't be crossed. And two people I trusted, family and a 15-year colleague, crossed every single line while I was blind to it. You weren't blind. You were focused on the bigger picture. They exploited that focus. That's not an excuse. No, Evelyn agreed, but it's human. You can't watch everything all the time. That's why you hired me. To find the rot I was too close to see. He turned to look at her. You've exceeded every expectation I had. You've uncovered systematic corruption, identified perpetrators across multiple levels, and built cases that will result in justice for people who were victimized. Do you understand how rare that is? How many people would have taken the easy path, reported the surface problems, and left the deeper issues buried? I'm not most people. No, you're not. Victor's expression softened slightly. The trial is in 3 weeks. The prosecution still wants your testimony. With Elizabeth's confession, they probably don't need it. They have enough to convict Marcus and everyone else involved. You could walk away now, let the system handle the rest. But I'm asking you to stay, not to testify, not to investigate, just to stay. Help me rebuild what was broken, implement the oversight systems we discussed, train others to see what you see, to question what you question, transform this organization into something that can't be corrupted the way it was. Evelyn studied him carefully. You're asking me to become part of the empire, not just an investigator, but a builder. I'm asking you to use your skills to create instead of just expose, to be someone who shapes the future instead of just documenting the failures of the past. He paused. Unless you'd prefer to go back to invisibility, to safety, to a life where other people's corruption isn't your problem. The offer hung between them, and Evelyn realized this was the real choice Victor had been preparing her for all along. Not whether to investigate or testify, but whether to commit fully to this world, to accept that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross and choose to move forward anyway. She thought about the workers who'd been exploited, about the systems that had failed them, about the possibility of building something better from the ruins of what had been. "I'll stay," she said, "but on one condition. Name it. The Victim Compensation Fund. I want to administer it personally, not just process payments, but actually meet the people who are hurt, understand their stories, ensure they get what they need to rebuild their lives." She met Victor's eyes. "If I'm going to be part of this empire, I need to see the human cost of its failures. I need to remember why the work matters." Victor smiled, genuine and warm. "Agreed. Consider it your primary responsibility." They stood together on the roof as the city woke up fully, watching traffic build and people move through streets below, each one invisible to the structures that shaped their lives. Evelyn had been invisible once, had moved through that world unseen and powerless. Now she stood at the top of an empire, given authority to question and change and rebuild. The girl who'd walked through the wrong door had become the woman who couldn't look away. And somewhere in the transformation, she'd found something unexpected. Not just power, but purpose. Not just the ability to expose corruption, but the responsibility to create something better in its place. The trial would happen. Marcus would be convicted. Elizabeth Park and Richard Moss and Paul Hendricks would face consequences for their choices. But the work wouldn't end there. It was just beginning. And Evelyn Carter, former janitor turned investigator turned architect of change, was ready for it. The Victim Compensation Fund office occupied a modest space on the ground floor of a building far from Victor's corporate headquarters. Evelyn had chosen the location deliberately, neutral territory, away from the tower that represented power and intimidation. Here, the people who'd been exploited could walk through doors without fear. She sat across from her first appointment, a woman named Rosa Martinez who'd worked night shift at Newark for 6 weeks before being transferred to a facility in Baltimore, then let go entirely when she'd asked about overtime pay. Rosa was 34 with tired eyes and hands that never stopped moving, twisting a tissue into smaller and smaller pieces. "I don't understand why you want to help," Rosa said, her accent thick but her English clear. "The company already paid me what they owed. 2 weeks severance." "That's not what this is about," Evelyn explained gently. "You were brought in under false pretenses, promised permanent employment, then cycled out before you could qualify for benefits or protections. That's exploitation, and we're trying to make it right." "By giving me money?" Rosa's laugh was bitter. "Money doesn't fix what happened. Money doesn't give me back the time I spent afraid. Afraid to complain, afraid to ask questions, afraid that if I made noise they'd call immigration even though my papers are legal." "You're right. Money doesn't fix fear." Evelyn pulled out a folder. "But it can provide stability while you rebuild. We're offering compensation equivalent to what you would have earned if given the permanent position you were promised. Additionally, we're providing job placement assistance, legal support if you choose to pursue immigration documentation for family members, and healthcare coverage for the next 2 years. Rosa stared at her. "Why?" "Because what happened to you was wrong. Because the people who did it are facing consequences, and you deserve more than just seeing them punished. You deserve restitution." Evelyn met Rosa's eyes. "I know this doesn't erase what you went through, but I hope it helps." Rosa's hands finally stilled. "How much?" Evelyn told her. Rosa's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "I can bring my daughter here," she whispered, "from Honduras. I've been trying for 3 years, but I couldn't afford the legal fees, the documentation, the process. With this, I can bring her home. Then let's make it happen." Evelyn passed over the compensation agreement and a separate folder containing information about immigration attorneys who'd agreed to provide pro bono services to anyone affected by Marcus's operations. Everything you need is here. And Rosa, if you need anything else, anything at all, you call me directly. Over the next 3 weeks, Evelyn met with 47 former employees. Each story was a variation on the same theme: people who'd been used, discarded, and left with nothing but fear and financial instability. Some were angry, some were broken, a few were suspicious, convinced the compensation was a trick, a way to buy their silence before some worse revelation emerged. Evelyn listened to all of them, documented their experiences, ensured they received not just money, but resources to actually rebuild their lives. And with each conversation, she felt the weight of what Victor's empire had enabled settle more heavily on her shoulders. She was in her office late one evening, reviewing case files, when Diana appeared in the doorway. "You look exhausted," Diana observed. "I am exhausted." Evelyn rubbed her eyes. "But I can't stop. Every person I meet represents a failure of the system we're supposed to be fixing. If I stop, if I slow down, I start thinking about how many more there might be. How many people we haven't found yet. You can't save everyone. That's what you said before. I still don't accept it." Evelyn stood, pacing. 47 people, Diana. 47 that we know about. But Marcus's operation ran for 2 years across 8 facilities. The math doesn't add up. There should be hundreds. Maybe there are. Maybe they don't want to be found. Some people just want to move on, forget what happened. Or maybe they're still too afraid to come forward. Evelyn pulled up personnel records on her computer. "Look at this. The turnover rate at Newark alone was over 300% annually during Marcus's tenure, even accounting for legitimate job changes. That's massive. Where did all those people go?" Diana moved closer, studying the numbers. "You think some of them are still out there, still working under the radar, still being exploited?" "I think we shut down one operation, but the infrastructure that enabled it still exists. The network of contractors who supply temporary workers, the documentation services that provide just enough paperwork to make people look legal, the channels that move people from facility to facility." Evelyn turned to Diana. "We cut off the head, but the body is still moving. That's a job for law enforcement, federal investigators. Who will take months to build cases while people continue suffering?" Evelyn closed the laptop. "I need to talk to Victor." She found him in his private office past midnight, which seemed to be his natural habitat. He was reviewing contracts when she entered, but set them aside immediately. "Evelyn, I heard the compensation meetings are going well. They're necessary, but they're not enough." She sat down without being invited, a familiarity that had developed over weeks of working closely together. "We've addressed the people Marcus directly exploited, but the system that enabled him is still operating. Temporary labor contractors, documentation services, transportation networks, they're all still out there, still moving workers through facilities. Those are legitimate businesses operating within legal parameters. Some of them are. Others are fronts for continued exploitation, and we won't know which is which until we investigate them the same way we investigated Newark." Victor leaned back, studying her. "You're talking about expanding the scope of the investigation significantly. That would require resources, time, and cooperation from agencies outside my control. I'm talking about finishing what we started. We exposed the corruption inside your empire. Now we need to address the external infrastructure that fed it." Evelyn pulled out a folder. She'd come prepared. "I've identified 12 contractors that supplied workers to Marcus's facilities. 6 of them have patterns that mirror what we found at Newark. High turnover, minimal documentation, workers who appear and disappear from records without explanation. What do you want to do about it?" "I want to investigate them, visit their offices, review their practices, interview their employees. If they're legitimate, we clear them. If they're exploiting people, we expose them and shut them down. And if they're connected to larger criminal networks, human trafficking organizations, smuggling operations?" Victor's expression was serious. "Because that's a real possibility, Evelyn. These contractors might be small pieces of something much bigger and much more dangerous than corporate corruption. Then we bring in law enforcement, FBI, immigration authorities, whoever has jurisdiction, but we can't do nothing just because it might be dangerous. I'm not suggesting we do nothing. I'm suggesting you consider the risk you're taking." Victor stood, moving to pour 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered her one, which she accepted. "You've made enemies, Evelyn. People who lost their positions, their freedom, They're carefully constructed operations because of your investigations. Some of them are in prison. Others are facing trial. But their associates, their partners, the people who profited from the same systems, they're still out there. And they know your name. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to make you think strategically. The work you're doing matters. It's important. But if you die doing it, all that stops. Someone else takes over the compensation fund, someone less thorough. The investigations slow down, lose momentum. The people you're trying to help end up forgotten. He took a sip of whiskey. I need you to stay alive more than I need you to be fearless. Evelyn set down her glass. I'm not being fearless, I'm terrified. Every time I meet with someone who is exploited, I wonder if Marcus's associates are watching, if they're planning retaliation, if I'm putting myself and everyone I talk to at risk. She met Victor's eyes. But I'm doing it anyway because someone has to. Because if we stop at comfortable victories and ignore the harder fights, we're just as complicit as the people we prosecuted. Victor was quiet for a long moment, swirling whiskey in his glass and watching the amber liquid catch the light. You've changed, he said finally. When I first met you, you were careful, cautious. You'd spent years learning to be invisible, to avoid risk. Now you're walking straight into danger because you believe it's right. You're the one who told me that invisible people see everything. Maybe being seen means using that knowledge, even when it's uncomfortable. Maybe. He finished his whiskey and set down the glass with finality. All right, you can investigate the contractors, but not alone and not without proper support. Diana goes with you on every visit, you report in daily, any hint of danger you extract immediately. And Evelyn, his voice hardened, if I give you an order to stand down because the risk is too high, you follow it. No arguments, no negotiation. Agreed? Agreed. Good. Start with the contractors that seem most legitimate. Build rapport, establish patterns. Then work your way toward the suspicious ones, and be smart about it. The contractor investigations began cautiously. The first three were exactly what they appeared to be. Small staffing agencies providing temporary labor for warehouses and logistics companies. Their records were clean, their workers treated reasonably, their practices legally sound if not particularly generous. The fourth contractor was different. Atlas Workforce Solutions operated out of a converted warehouse in an industrial area that had seen better decades. The building was surrounded by chain-link fencing, and security cameras covered every angle. When Evelyn and Diana arrived for their scheduled appointment, they were made to wait in a sparse reception area for 40 minutes before anyone acknowledged them. The manager who finally appeared was a man in his 50s named Carl Reeves. No relation to Diana, just an unfortunate coincidence. He had the build of someone who'd worked physical labor most of his life, with hands scarred from old injuries and eyes that assessed them with professional suspicion. You're from Hale Industries, he said without preamble, here to audit our contract. Here to review practices, Evelyn corrected. We're conducting assessments of all our labor contractors to ensure compliance with updated standards. What standards? Worker treatment, documentation protocols, turnover rates, complaint procedures. Evelyn pulled out her tablet. Standard audit material should only take a few hours if your records are organized. Carl's expression didn't change. Our records are fine. Wait, what's this really about? Exactly what I said. Right. And it's just coincidence that you're visiting now, after that business with Marcus Hale and the Newark facility. Carl crossed his arms. I read the news. I know what happened. You think we're part of that? I think we're reviewing all contractors to ensure similar issues don't exist elsewhere. If your operation is clean, you have nothing to worry about. Carl stared at them for a long moment, then gestured toward a hallway. Fine. Records are in the back office. But you touch nothing without my supervision, and you don't talk to my workers without me present. Clear? Crystal, Diana said, her tone pleasant but her posture alert. The records room was exactly what Evelyn had expected. Filing cabinets stuffed with documents, a computer system that looked outdated by a decade, and an atmosphere of barely organized chaos. Carl pulled files for their review, maintaining a running commentary about the difficulty of paperwork and compliance requirements. But as Evelyn reviewed the personnel records, she noticed the same patterns that had appeared at Newark. Workers who appeared on rosters for a few weeks, then vanished. Documentation that looked legitimate at first glance but had subtle inconsistencies. social security numbers that followed predictable patterns rather than random assignment, addresses that repeated across multiple employees, emergency contacts that were identical for different people. "Mr. Reeves," she said carefully, "I'm seeing some irregularities in the documentation here." "What kind of irregularities?" "Multiple workers listing the same address, several social security numbers that don't follow standard formatting protocols." She turned the screen toward him. "Can you explain these?" Carl barely glanced at the screen. "Workers share housing sometimes. Cheaper that way. And I'm not responsible for verifying social security numbers. I submit what people give me to E-Verify, and if it clears, it clears. E-Verify has limitations. It can miss fraudulent documents if they're well made. Not my problem. I follow the legal requirements. What people do beyond that is on them." Diana had moved to one of the filing cabinets, casually examining documents. These termination records, there's no exit interviews, no final pay stubs, just notes saying contract ended. That's unusual. Temporary workers don't get exit interviews. They finish their assignment, they leave. Simple. "Where do they go?" Evelyn asked. "How should I know? I'm not their keeper. They work, they get paid, they move on to the next job." "Do you maintain contact information for workers after they leave?" "Why would I? They're not my employees anymore." Evelyn pulled up the placement records, cross-referencing them with facility reports. "In the past 18 months, you've placed over 200 workers at various Hale facilities. Of those 200, I can only find continued employment records for about 30%. The rest just disappear from the system entirely. That's a 70% attrition rate that leaves no trail." Carl's expression hardened. "Like I said, temporary workers move around. That's the nature of the business. Or they're being cycled through deliberately to prevent them from establishing any employment protections or asking uncomfortable questions about what they're being asked to do. That's a serious accusation. It's an observation based on data." Evelyn stood, facing Carl directly. "Mr. Reeves, I'm going to be very clear with you. The operation Marcus Hale was running exploited vulnerable workers by using temporary contractors as a shield. If you were part of that system, knowingly or otherwise, this is your opportunity to cooperate and potentially avoid prosecution. If you weren't part of it, then helping us understand where these workers went and how your documentation processes work benefits everyone." Carl's jaw tightened. "I think this audit is over. You've seen the records. If you have formal complaints, file them through proper channels with your lawyers present. We're not done reviewing—" Yes, you are." Carl moved to the door, opening it in clear dismissal. "This is private property. I've cooperated with your voluntary audit. If you want more access, come back with a warrant." Diana caught Evelyn's eye, giving a subtle shake of her head. Pushing now would accomplish nothing except alerting Carl that they were onto something. "Thank you for your time," Evelyn said, gathering her materials. "We'll be in touch." They left Atlas Workforce Solutions with more questions than answers. In the car, Diana pulled out her phone and started making calls. "Robert, I need deep background on a contractor called Atlas Workforce Solutions, owner Carl Reeves. Financial records, criminal history, business associations, everything you can find." She listened to the response. "Because I think we just found the next link in the chain." Evelyn stared out the window as they drove, her mind replaying the conversation with Carl. The defensive posture, the refusal to provide additional information, the way he'd shut down the moment she'd asked about worker placement after termination. "He's hiding something," she said. "Obviously. Question is what and how deep it goes." Diana navigated through traffic with practiced efficiency. Carl Reeves isn't sophisticated enough to run a major operation on his own. If he's involved in continued exploitation, he's working for someone else. Or he's a knowing participant in a larger network. Either way, we need to find those missing workers. Over 100 people placed through Atlas in just the past year who vanished from all employment records. That's not normal turnover. It's also not evidence of a crime. People quit jobs without notice all the time. They move, they change careers, they go off-grid. Following up on every missing worker would take months. Then we start with the recent ones. The people who were placed in the last 3 months, who should still be relatively easy to track down. Evelyn pulled out her tablet, already compiling a list. If we can find even a few of them, and they report similar experiences to what we documented at Newark, that establishes a pattern. Diana glanced at her. You know what you're doing, right? Following this thread means potentially uncovering human trafficking networks, organized crime, people who respond to investigation with violence rather than lawyers. I know. And you're doing it anyway. Someone has to. Diana was quiet for a moment, then smiled slightly. Victor was right about you. You're either very brave or very stupid. Possibly both. He said the same thing. What did you tell him? That I'm probably both. Evelyn looked at Diana. What would you do? If you found evidence of systematic exploitation, would you walk away because it was dangerous? 5 years ago? Probably. I was good at my job, but I kept it compartmentalized. Did what I was paid to do, didn't ask bigger questions. Diana's expression turned thoughtful. But watching you work, seeing how you refuse to accept comfortable answers when uncomfortable truths are sitting right there, it makes it harder to look away. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, and a warning to myself that working with you is going to get me killed eventually. Despite the tension, Evelyn smiled. But you're still here. Unfortunately, yes. Someone needs to keep you alive while you charge at windmills. They returned to headquarters, where Robert Chen was already waiting with preliminary information on Atlas Workforce Solutions. His expression was grim. Carl Reeves has no criminal record, no obvious red flags, Robert said, spreading documents across a conference table. But his business associations are interesting. Atlas receives regular payments from a shell company called Northern Distribution Partners. No obvious business relationship, no contracts on file, just monthly wire transfers of $50,000 to $70,000. Payoffs, Diana said immediately. Most likely, Northern Distribution Partners is registered in Delaware, which makes tracking ownership difficult. But I was able to trace some of the payments backward, and they originate from an account connected to a logistics company called Meridian Transport. Evelyn felt cold recognition. Meridian Transport supplied the trucks for Marcus's off-schedule deliveries. They're in the evidence files. Exactly. Which means Atlas Workforce Solutions isn't just a contractor that got used by Marcus's operation. They're an active participant in a network that's still operating. Robert pulled up financial records on his laptop. And it gets worse. Meridian Transport has connections to 6 other staffing agencies across 4 states. If they're all operating the same way Atlas is, we're looking at a regional network exploiting potentially thousands of workers. The scope of it hit Evelyn like a physical blow. They'd thought Marcus's operation was the disease, but it was just a symptom of something larger, more organized, more entrenched. We need federal involvement, she said. This is beyond corporate investigation. This is organized crime. Agreed, Robert said. I've already reached out to contacts at the FBI. They're interested, but they need evidence before they can justify resources. Right now, we have suspicious financial patterns and missing workers. That's not enough. What would be enough? Testimony from exploited workers, documentation of actual crimes, fraud, trafficking, coercion, evidence that the network is operating across state lines with criminal intent. Robert closed his laptop. Basically, we need to do exactly what you did with Newark, but on a much larger scale. That could take months. Or it could take weeks if we're smart about it. You found 47 victims of Marcus's operation in 3 weeks. Apply the same methodology to Atlas and the connected agencies, and we might have enough to trigger federal action. Evelyn looked at Diana, who shrugged. Your call. But if we're going after an organized network, we need more than just the 2 of us. We need a team. I'll provide one. Victor's voice came from the doorway. He'd entered so quietly none of them had noticed. Investigators, security, legal support, whatever you need. But Evelyn, understand what you're committing to. This isn't exposing corporate corruption anymore. This is taking on criminal enterprises that have no reason to show restraint. I understand. Do you? Because the people we prosecuted before, Marcus, Elizabeth, Richard, they operated within systems that gave them incentive to avoid violence. They had careers to protect, reputations to maintain. The people running trafficking networks have no such constraints. If they perceive you as a threat, they'll respond accordingly. Then we'll be careful. We'll have security. We'll coordinate with law enforcement. Evelyn moved to stand in front of Victor. But we're not stopping. Not when we know people are still being exploited. Not when we have the resources and knowledge to do something about it. Victor studied her for a long moment, and Evelyn saw something complex in his expression. Pride, maybe, mixed with concern and a kind of resignation. "All right," he said finally. "Robert, assemble a team. Experienced investigators only, people who can handle themselves in difficult situations. Diana, coordinate security protocols. I want multiple layers of protection for everyone involved." He turned to Evelyn. "And you're going to learn how to handle a weapon." "I don't think—" "That wasn't a request. If you're going to put yourself in danger, you're going to have basic self-defense capabilities. Diana will arrange training starting tomorrow." Evelyn wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. "Fine. Good. Now go home, get some rest. Tomorrow, we start building the case that's going to bring down an entire network." The firearms training was harder than Evelyn expected. Diana took her to a private range, started with basic safety protocols, then moved to actual shooting. Evelyn's hands shook the first dozen times she pulled the trigger, the recoil and noise overwhelming her senses. "You're thinking too much," Diana said, adjusting Evelyn's stance. "Your brain is telling you this is dangerous, foreign, wrong. You need to override that and trust the mechanics. Stance, sight, squeeze, that's all it is." "That's all it is to you. You've been doing this for years. And you've been doing investigative work for months, and you're already better than people I've worked with for decades. Same principle. Practice makes competence." Diana loaded another magazine. Again, focus on the target, not the gun. Evelyn tried, failed, tried again. By the end of the session, she could hit the target more often than not, though calling her proficient would be generous. "Better," Diana said. "We'll keep practicing." "But Evelyn, carrying a weapon doesn't make you safe. It makes you armed. There's a difference. The goal is never to need it." "Understood." Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn's life became a blur of investigation, training, and coordination. Robert assembled a team of 6 investigators, all with backgrounds in fraud and organized crime. They began systematic outreach to workers who'd been placed through Atlas and the connected agencies, offering the same compensation and support that had worked with Marcus's victims. The response was slower this time. People were more suspicious, more afraid. But gradually, they found individuals willing to talk. Maria Santos had been placed through Atlas at a facility in Philadelphia. She'd been promised permanent employment, given minimal documentation, and cycled out after 5 weeks when she'd asked about healthcare benefits. When Atlas terminated her contract, they'd also reported her to immigration authorities with anonymous tips about fraudulent documentation they'd provided in the first place. David Chen had worked at 3 different facilities over 6 months, each placement through companies connected to Meridian Transport. Every time he'd started asking questions about overtime pay or safety conditions, he'd been transferred to a new location. Eventually, they'd stopped placing him entirely, and he'd been blacklisted across the entire network. The stories accumulated, each one a variation on exploitation, coercion, and systematic abuse designed to keep workers compliant and afraid. And with each story, the evidence file grew thicker. By the end of the 3rd week, they had testimony from 32 workers, financial records showing the network structure, and documentation proving coordination between multiple agencies to suppress complaints and maintain control. Robert presented it all to his FBI contacts. This time they listened. "We're opening a formal investigation," the lead agent told them in a conference call. His name was Marcus Webb. No relation to Marcus Hale, another unfortunate coincidence, and he had 15 years of experience with human trafficking cases. "What you've compiled is solid foundation work, but we need more before we can move to arrests. We need to identify the leadership, prove criminal conspiracy, and establish federal jurisdiction through interstate commerce violations." "How long will that take?" Evelyn asked. "Months, potentially. We'll need to build cases that can withstand court scrutiny, coordinate with multiple jurisdictions, and ensure we're not just arresting low-level operators while the real architects escape. People are being exploited while you build perfect cases." "I know, but if we move too fast and the cases fall apart, everyone walks and the operation continues. We have to do this right." Webb's tone was sympathetic but firm. "Continue your victim outreach. Document everything. The stronger the foundation you build, the faster we can act." The call ended, and Evelyn sat in frustrated silence. She understood the logic, knew that rushing would compromise the investigation, but understanding didn't make it easier to accept. "We keep working," Victor said quietly. He'd been listening to the call, his expression unreadable. "We find more victims, build more evidence, and when the FBI is ready to move, we ensure they have everything they need to bury this network completely. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we do what we can. The compensation fund helps people rebuild. The testimony we're gathering creates a record, and every person we reach is one more who knows they're not alone, not forgotten." Victor met her eyes. "It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's what we have." Evelyn nodded, swallowing her frustration. "Then we keep working." But fate, it seemed, had different plans. 2 days later, Diana didn't show up for their morning briefing. Evelyn tried calling, no answer. Sent texts, no response. After an hour of silence, she contacted Robert. "Diana's not responding," she said, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. "Have you heard from her?" "No, that's unlike her." Robert's tone shifted to professional concern. "When did you last speak with her?" "Last night. She said she was following up on a lead about Atlas, wanted to check something before bringing it to the team." "What lead?" "She didn't specify, said she'd brief me this morning if it panned out." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I'm sending security to her apartment. Stay where you are." Evelyn waited, each minute stretching into eternity. When her phone finally rang, Robert's voice was tight with controlled anger. Diana's apartment was broken into, signs of struggle. "She's gone." The world seemed to tilt. "Gone how? Kidnapped? Injured?" "Unknown, but there was a message left, written on her mirror in marker." Robert's voice was hard. "It says, 'Stop digging or she pays for your curiosity.'" Evelyn felt ice flood her veins. They'd taken Diana. The network she'd been investigating, the people she'd been exposing, had responded exactly as Victor had warned they might, with violence. And it was entirely her fault. Evelyn stared at her phone, Robert's words echoing in her mind like a death sentence. Diana was gone. Taken because Evelyn had pushed too hard, dug too deep, refused to accept the safer path. "I'm coming to headquarters," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "No, stay where you are. If they took Diana, they might be watching you too." "I don't care. We need to find her. And we will. But not by making yourself the next target." Robert's tone softened slightly. "Evelyn, I know you're blaming yourself. Don't. Diana knew the risks. She chose this work the same way you did." "That doesn't make it okay." "No. But it means we honor her choice by being smart, not reckless. Give me 2 hours to coordinate with law enforcement and Victor. Then we'll plan our next move." The call ended before Evelyn could argue. She sat in the compensation fund office, surrounded by files of people she'd helped, and felt the weight of her decisions crushing her. Every investigation, every exposure, every choice to push forward instead of stopping at comfortable victories, they'd all led here, to Diana paying the price for Evelyn's conviction. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Against every instinct screaming caution, she answered. "Miss Carter." The voice was male, calm, with an accent she couldn't quite place. "I believe you're looking for your friend." Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. "Where is she?" "Safe, for now. Whether she stays that way depends entirely on your choices." There was a pause, the sound of movement in the background. "You've been very busy these past months. Destroying careers, exposing operations, playing hero for people who don't matter. That ends now. If you hurt her, you'll what? Call the police, the FBI? We both know they can't move fast enough to help her." The voice remained pleasant, almost conversational. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to destroy every piece of evidence you've collected about Atlas Workforce Solutions and the associated network. You're going to convince Victor Hale to drop the investigation. You're going to make this all go away. And if I do that, you'll release Diana. If you do that, she lives. If you don't, she becomes an example of what happens to people who interfere with business that doesn't concern them." "How do I know she's even alive?" There was a rustling sound, then Diana's voice, tight with pain but unmistakable. "Evelyn, don't—" A sharp sound cut her off, followed by silence. "You have 24 hours, the man said. Destroy the evidence or lose your friend. Choose wisely." The line went dead. Evelyn sat frozen, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Destroying the evidence meant abandoning the investigation, letting the network continue exploiting people, betraying every victim who'd trusted her with their story. But refusing meant Diana died, and Evelyn would carry that weight forever. There was no good choice, only terrible ones with different costs. She called Victor. He answered on the first ring. Robert briefed me. Are you safe? They just called. They want me to destroy the evidence and shut down the investigation in exchange for Diana's life. Victor was silent for a long moment. What did you tell them? Nothing. They gave me 24 hours to decide. And what are you going to decide? The question hung between them, heavy with implications Evelyn didn't want to examine too closely. Victor was asking what she valued more, one life or the mission, one person or the principle. I don't know, she admitted. I can't let her die, but I can't abandon everyone we've been trying to help either. Then we find a third option. Victor's voice was hard, decisive. Get to my office now. Robert's already assembling the team. We're going to find Diana and destroy the people who took her. In 24 hours? We've done harder things in less time. There was steel in his tone. Move. Now. Evelyn moved. Victor's office had been transformed into a command center. Robert stood at a table covered with maps and surveillance photos. 3 people Evelyn didn't recognize. Members of Robert's investigative team worked laptops with intense focus, and Victor stood at the center of it all, coordinating with the controlled precision of someone who'd commanded operations before. Talk to me, he said as Evelyn entered. The call. Every detail you remember. She replayed the conversation, focusing on background sounds, the caller's voice, anything that might provide a clue. One of the investigators, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, typed rapidly as Evelyn spoke. The accent, the woman said. You said you couldn't place it. Eastern European? South American? Neither. Or maybe both, like someone who'd lived in multiple places and the accent blended. That helps? Meridian Transport has connections to a logistics operator who fits that profile. Ukrainian immigrant runs legitimate business as a front for various criminal enterprises. The woman pulled up a file. Dmitry Volkov, no direct arrests, but suspected involvement in trafficking, smuggling, money laundering. Victor studied the photo. If Volkov has Diana, she's likely being held at one of his properties. Robert, what do we have? 3 known locations in the metro area. Warehouse in the industrial district, commercial building downtown, residential property in the suburbs. Robert marked them on a map. FBI has had surveillance on the warehouse and downtown building for years, never enough evidence to raid. The residential property is newer, acquired 6 months ago. After our investigation into Marcus started, Evelyn noted, he knew this was coming. Smart. He prepared for exposure. Victor leaned over the map. If I wanted to hold someone for leverage, I'd choose the location with the least surveillance, which is the residential property. It's also the most exposed for extraction, Robert cautioned. Suburban neighborhood, security cameras on nearby houses, limited escape routes. Which is why they won't expect us to hit it. Victor looked at his team. We have less than 24 hours. FBI can't move that fast without hard evidence, and we don't have time to gather it. This is a private operation. One of the investigators looked uncertain. Sir, with all respect, mounting an unauthorized extraction is illegal, dangerous, potentially catastrophic if we're wrong. Victor's expression was carved stone. I'm aware. Anyone who's uncomfortable with that can leave now with no judgment. No one moved. Good. Robert, coordinate with our security teams. I want tactical support, extraction protocols, and backup plans for when things go wrong. But Victor turned to Evelyn. You're not going. The hell I'm not. This isn't a negotiation. You're the target. If you show up, you give them exactly what they want. Diana was taken because of my investigation. I'm not sitting in an office while other people risk themselves to fix my mistake. It's not your mistake. It's the consequence of doing the right thing in a world that punishes it. Victor moved closer, his voice lowering. But I need you here, coordinating with law enforcement. When we extract Diana, Volkov and his people will know the investigation isn't stopping. They'll retaliate. We need the FBI ready to move immediately with arrest warrants. Agent Webb said they need more time. Then convince him time's a luxury we don't have. Use the kidnapping as leverage to accelerate the federal investigation. Make him understand that if he doesn't act now, more people die. Victor's eyes locked onto hers. You're good at finding truth and making people see it. Do that. Make Webb see that moving fast is the only option left. Evelyn wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. She was more useful pressuring law enforcement than playing soldier in an extraction she wasn't trained for. All right, she said. I'll call Webb. Good. You have 6 hours to get us federal support. After that, we move whether they're ready or not. Agent Marcus Webb was not pleased to receive a call at 3 a.m., and he was even less pleased when Evelyn explained the situation. You're telling me Victor Hale is planning an unsanctioned extraction operation based on a phone call and circumstantial evidence, Webb said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. I'm telling you Diana Reeves was kidnapped by the network we've been investigating, that we have credible intelligence on her location, and that we're running out of time to save her life. Credible intelligence from what source? From months of investigation into Dmitry Volkov's operations, from financial records connecting him to Atlas Workforce Solutions and Meridian Transport, from witness testimony placing him at the center of a trafficking network. Evelyn forced herself to stay calm. Agent Webb, I know this isn't how you want to build a case, but Diana doesn't have time for perfect procedure. And if Hale's team goes in shooting and Diana gets killed in the crossfire, or if they hit the wrong location and tip off Volkov that we're onto him, or if they rescue Diana but compromise evidence that would put him away for decades. Webb's frustration was palpable. I understand your urgency, but I can't authorize federal resources for a vigilante operation. Then don't authorize resources. Just be ready. Evelyn pulled up the files on her computer, starting to compile everything into a format Webb could use. I'm sending you everything we have, witness statements, financial records, documentation of the network's structure. If we extract Diana successfully, Volkov will either run or retaliate. Either way, you'll have justification for immediate action. That's not how it works. That's exactly how it works, and you know it. You've been building a case for months, but you need a catalyst to justify moving before it's perfect. Diana's kidnapping is that catalyst. Evelyn's voice hardened. People are being exploited right now, Agent Webb. Every day you wait is another day someone suffers. So you can wait for perfect evidence and watch this network continue operating, or you can be ready to move when we hand you the opening you need. Webb was silent for a long moment. If this goes wrong, it won't. You can't guarantee that. No, but I can guarantee that doing nothing guarantees failure. Evelyn finished compiling the files. Hit send. Check your email. Everything we have is yours. Use it. Ms. Carter. Webb's tone shifted slightly. I hope you know what you're doing. So do I. She ended the call and returned to Victor's office, where the tactical planning was reaching its final stages. Robert had assembled a security team of 8, all former military or law enforcement, all experienced in high-risk operations. They reviewed schematics of Volkov's residential property, mapped entry points, planned contingencies. The house has security, but it's not military grade, Robert explained, pointing to surveillance photos. 2 guards visible at the front, possibly more inside. Standard cameras, reinforced doors, but nothing we can't handle. What about Diana's location inside? Victor asked. Unknown. Could be basement, upstairs bedroom, anywhere they feel is secure. We won't know until we're inside. Then we go in fast, secure the property, extract anyone being held, and get out before local police respond to neighbor calls. Victor checked his watch. 4 hours until we move. Everyone get rest, check equipment, and prepare for this to go sideways. The team dispersed, leaving Evelyn alone with Victor. You did well with Webb, he said quietly. Getting him ready to move is half the battle. What's the other half? Surviving the next 4 hours and hoping Diana's still alive when we find her. Victor moved to his windows, looking out at the city lights. I've done operations like this before, Evelyn, years ago, before I built the legitimate face of this empire. I know how they can go wrong. Are you having second thoughts? I'm having every thought. Second, third, fourth guessing every decision. He turned to face her. But Diana is family, not by blood but by choice and loyalty. I don't abandon family, even when the smart play would be to negotiate, to trade evidence for her life and rebuild the investigation later. Why not do that? Because it wouldn't work. People like Volkov don't honor deals. They exploit them. We destroy the evidence. He keeps Diana as insurance for the next time we get too close. We'd be trading temporary compliance for permanent leverage. Victor's expression was granite. The only way to end this is to end it completely. Destroy the network, rescue Diana, and make it clear that taking hostages from my organization has consequences. The words should have sounded like bravado. Instead, they sounded like a promise. What do you need me to do? Evelyn asked. Wait, monitor communications. If Volkov calls again, stall him. And if something goes wrong, Victor pulled out a phone different from his usual one. Use this to contact Webb. Tell him where we went, what we found. Make sure the investigation continues even if we don't come back. Evelyn took the phone, the weight of it feeling like responsibility and dread combined. You're coming back. Probably, but probably isn't certain. Victor's slight smile was tired. Get some rest. This is going to be a long night. The next 4 hours were agony. Evelyn tried to sleep, but couldn't. She reviewed the evidence files, double-checked that everything had been sent to Webb, prepared contingency plans for scenarios she didn't want to imagine. At 7 a.m., Victor's team assembled in the parking garage. They wore tactical gear, carried weapons, and moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. Robert did a final equipment check. Victor gave last-minute instructions, and Evelyn watched them drive away, knowing that Diana's life, and possibly theirs, depended on the next hour going exactly right. She returned to Victor's office to wait. 30 minutes later, her phone rang. Robert's number. We're at the property. 2 guards at the front, 1 at the back, moving in 60 seconds. Then silence. Evelyn counted seconds in her head, each one stretching into eternity. At 90 seconds, she heard sounds through the phone, shouting, movement, something heavy hitting something else. Property secured. Robert's voice came back, slightly breathless. 3 guards down, no resistance. Searching for Diana now. More silence, more counting. Got her. Basement. She's alive but injured. We need medical. Relief flooded through Evelyn so intensely she had to sit down. How bad? Conscious, mobile. Looks like they roughed her up, but nothing critical. We're extracting now. Any sign of Volkov? Negative. He's not here. But we found files, computers, documents, the whole operations administrative center. Evelyn, this is bigger than we thought. Multiple states, connections to international trafficking, financial networks that go way beyond simple labor exploitation. Secure everything. Webb needs it for the federal case. Already on it. We're loading it now and... Robert's voice cut off suddenly. Then, urgent. We have company. Multiple vehicles approaching armed men. This was a trap. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Get out of there. Working on it. Tell Webb we need federal support now. This location, immediate response. The line went dead. Evelyn grabbed the emergency phone Victor had given her, calling Webb with shaking hands. They found Diana, but it's a trap, she said the moment he answered. Volkov's people are moving in. They need backup at the suburban property now. I can't authorize. You don't have to authorize. You just have to respond. There's an officer in danger. Shots are about to be fired, and you have the address. Send everyone. To Webb's credit, he didn't argue further. Units are rolling, but Ms. Carter, if Hale's team open fire first, they won't. They're extracting a hostage from a kidnapping. Everything they're doing is defensive. She hoped that was true. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Evelyn's life. She monitored police scanners, listened to emergency radio traffic, and waited for some sign that the situation was resolving. Then Victor called. We're clear. Diana's safe. We have the files, and federal agents are swarming the property. Volkov's people scattered when FBI showed up. Is everyone okay? Some injuries, nothing critical. Robert took a graze, but he's functional. Diana needs medical attention, but she's stable. Victor's voice carried exhaustion and relief in equal measure. We did it. Did we? Volkov wasn't there. He's still out there. Not for long. The files we recovered, Evelyn, they're comprehensive. Names, locations, financial records, communications. It's everything the FBI needs to dismantle the entire network. Webb's already calling it the biggest trafficking case in the region's history. Evelyn felt tears she hadn't realized she was holding back start to fall. Diana's really okay? She's asking for you. Says you probably blame yourself and need to stop being dramatic. Despite everything, Evelyn laughed. That sounds like her. We're heading to a secure medical facility. Meet us there. The facility was a private clinic that handled discrete cases for people who couldn't use public hospitals. Evelyn arrived to find Diana sitting up in a hospital bed, her face bruised and her arm in a temporary sling, but very much alive. You look terrible, Diana said by way of greeting. You're the one in the hospital bed. Minor details. Diana's attempted smile turned into a wince. They worked me over pretty good trying to get me to tell them where the evidence was stored. Joke's on them. I didn't actually know. Security protocol. Evelyn sat in the chair beside the bed. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. Shut up. This is Volkov's fault for being a criminal psychopath, and Marcus Hale's fault for creating the system that made people like Volkov possible in the first place. You just exposed it. Diana shifted carefully. Besides, I signed up for this. Knew the risks. Would do it again. You're insane. Probably. But so are you, so we match. Diana's expression turned serious. Did we get everything? Was it worth it? Robert says the files are comprehensive. FBI is already moving on arrests across 4 states. Volkov's network is done. And Volkov himself? Still out there, but his infrastructure is collapsing. He can run, but he can't rebuild. Diana nodded slowly. Then, yeah, worth it. Victor entered the room, looking more exhausted than Evelyn had ever seen him. But when he saw Diana awake and talking, something in his expression eased. You scared the hell out of me, he said simply. Sorry, boss. Occupational hazard. Take a week off. Paid. Doctor's orders. I'll take 3 days and be back in the office by Thursday. I'm not negotiating. Neither am I. They stared at each other for a moment, then both smiled. It was the kind of exchange that spoke to years of trust and mutual respect. Evelyn, Victor said, turning to her, Webb wants to debrief you. He's coordinating the federal takedown and needs everything you have on the network structure. I'll head over now. Actually, Victor's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression shifted to something sharp and satisfied. Webb's coming here. They just arrested Dmitry Volkov at the airport trying to flee the country. The news hit Evelyn like a physical impact. They got him. They got him, along with 37 members of his network across 6 states. It's over. Over. The word felt surreal. Months of investigation, of exposure and danger and impossible choices. People prosecuted, careers destroyed, a network of exploitation dismantled piece by piece. And now, finally, over. Evelyn felt the tension she'd been carrying for months start to unravel, replaced by exhaustion so profound she could barely stay upright. You should rest, Victor said gently. The debriefing can wait a few hours. I'm fine. You're about to fall over. Diana, tell her she's about to fall over. You're about to fall over, Diana confirmed. Go home, sleep. The criminals will still be arrested when you wake up. Evelyn wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the energy. Fine, but I want a full briefing as soon as Webb has charges filed. You'll have it. Victor gestured toward the door. Go. That's an order. She went. 2 weeks later, Evelyn stood in a courtroom watching Dmitry Volkov and 17 of his associates being arraigned on federal charges. Human trafficking, conspiracy, fraud, racketeering. The list was extensive and damning. The evidence was overwhelming. The defense attorneys looked like they were already planning plea deals. Agent Webb approached her in the hallway afterward. Hell of a case, he said. Your investigation laid the groundwork that made all of this possible. The Bureau wants to formally thank you for your cooperation. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, but you're getting it anyway. Webb paused. You ever consider working for us? We could use someone with your investigative instincts. Evelyn thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. No, thank you, but no. Fair enough. Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands. Webb handed her his card. And Ms. Carter, what you did, exposing this network, helping those victims, it matters. More than you probably realize. After he left, Evelyn stood in the courthouse hallway watching lawyers and defendants and families navigate the machinery of justice. The system was slow, Imperfect, frequently frustrating, but it was working. People who'd exploited others were facing consequences. Victims were being heard. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She returned to the compensation fund office, where a line of people waited to meet with her. More victims coming forward, more stories that needed to be heard and addressed. The work continued. Rosa Martinez was there, accompanied by a teenage girl with Rosa's eyes and a shy smile. "My daughter," Rosa said, pride evident in every syllable. "She arrived last week. The immigration attorneys you connected me with made it possible." Evelyn felt something warm settle in her chest. "I'm so glad. Thank you for everything, for seeing us when we were invisible, for making it right." After they left, Evelyn sat at her desk and allowed herself a moment to feel the weight of what had been accomplished. Hundreds of people helped. A criminal network destroyed. Systems reformed. It wasn't everything. There would always be more corruption to expose, more injustice to address. But it was something real and meaningful. Her phone buzzed. Victor, requesting her presence at his office. She arrived to find him standing by his windows in the position she'd come to recognize as his thinking pose. He turned when she entered. "The board met this morning," he said without preamble. "They want to formalize your position, create a new department dedicated to internal oversight and victim assistance, with you as director. Full autonomy, independent budget, authority to investigate any part of the organization. That's a significant commitment. It's necessary. You proved that corruption can hide in plain sight if no one's willing to look for it. I want someone whose job is to look, to question, to hold everyone, including me, accountable." Evelyn studied him carefully. "You really mean that? The part about holding you accountable?" "I do. Because the alternative is becoming Marcus, building something that looks legitimate while rot festers underneath. I refuse to be that." Victor moved to his desk, pulling out a formal offer letter. "This isn't charity or gratitude. It's recognition that what you do, finding truth in the gaps between appearance and reality, is essential to everything I'm trying to build." Evelyn took the letter, reading through the terms. The salary was substantial. The authority was real. The responsibility was enormous. "What about the people who hate me for what I exposed?" she asked. "Marcus's associates, Elizabeth Park's allies, everyone whose careers ended because of my investigations. They're not going to just accept me having more power. No. They're going to resist, obstruct, and try to undermine you at every opportunity." Victor's smile was sharp. "Which is why you'll have my full support. Anyone who interferes with your work interferes with me. That tends to discourage bad behavior. And if I find corruption that leads back to you, if I discover that you've crossed lines you shouldn't have, then you report it, same as anyone else." Victor met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to be loyal to me personally, Evelyn. I'm asking you to be loyal to the principles we've been fighting for. Transparency, accountability, justice for people who've been exploited. If I violate those principles, I should face the same consequences as everyone else." It was the answer she needed to hear. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." "Good. You start Monday. Robert will brief you on the organizational structure and resources available. Diana will continue handling security. And Evelyn," Victor's expression softened slightly, "thank you for walking through that wrong door all those months ago, for refusing to look away when looking away would have been easier, for changing this empire from the inside. I didn't change it alone. No, but you started it. That matters." 6 months later, Evelyn stood in front of a room full of new hires, people she'd recruited to staff the newly created Department of Internal Oversight and Victim Assistance. They were investigators, counselors, legal advocates, people committed to ensuring that what happened with Marcus's network never happened again. "Your job isn't going to be easy," she told them. "You're going to find things people want hidden. You're going to ask questions that make powerful people uncomfortable. You're going to advocate for people who've been taught that their voices don't matter." She paused, looking at the faces watching her with varying degrees of nervousness and determination. "But here's what I learned over the past year. Invisible people see everything. And when those people find their voices, when they refuse to stay silent about injustice, systems change. Not overnight, not perfectly, but they change." After the meeting, she returned to her office, larger now, with a window and a team and resources that felt almost surreal compared to where she'd started. Diana was waiting, looking fully recovered and annoyingly energetic. "The board wants a quarterly report on department activities," Diana said, dropping a folder on Evelyn's desk. "Of course they do." "Also, there's a complaint about the Newark facility again. New management, but some of the workers say the night shift protocols are sliding back toward the old patterns." Evelyn sighed. "Set up a site visit for next week. Full audit." "Already scheduled," Diana grinned. "You're learning to predict my moves." "I've learned that when you show up with that particular smile, it means more work is coming." "Smart. Speaking of work, Victor wants to see you. Something about expanding the victim compensation program to cover people affected by other historical operations." "How historical?" "He didn't specify, but knowing Victor, probably going back years." Evelyn gathered her materials and headed to Victor's office. The route was familiar now, traveled so many times she could walk it without thinking. So different from that first terrified trip when she'd been a janitor stumbling into a world she didn't understand. Victor greeted her with his usual efficiency, diving straight into the proposal. He wanted to expand the compensation program, address past injustices that predated Marcus's operation, and establish a permanent fund to help anyone harmed by the organization's activities. "It's going to cost tens of millions," he said. "The board is resisting. They think we've done enough, that continuing to dig into the past will only create more liability." "What do you think?" "I think if we stop at convenient justice, we're no better than the people we prosecuted. Either we commit to making things right, or we admit we're just protecting ourselves." Victor looked at her. "I need you to build the case. Show the board why this matters, why it's worth the cost." "You want me to convince them to spend millions on people they'll never meet for harm they didn't personally cause?" "Yes. Is that a problem?" Evelyn thought about Rosa and her daughter. About the workers she'd met through the compensation fund, people whose lives had been changed by someone finally acknowledging the harm done to them. About the difference between performing righteousness and actually doing the work. "No," she said. "It's not a problem. I'll build the case." 2 months later, the board approved the expanded compensation program. 6 months after that, they'd helped over 300 people affected by various operations spanning a decade. The work was slow, often frustrating and never-ending, but it mattered. Evelyn stood in the victim assistance office one evening, reviewing files, when Victor called. "Come to my office, there's someone I want you to meet." She arrived to find a young woman sitting across from Victor's desk, mid-20s, dressed professionally, but with the nervous energy of someone out of her element. She had a worn notebook in her hands. "Evelyn, this is Sarah Chen," Victor said. "She works in accounting on the 40th floor. Sarah, this is Evelyn Carter, Director of Internal Oversight." Sarah stood, shaking Evelyn's hand with a grip that was just slightly too tight. "I've heard about you. About what you did, exposing the corruption." "What can we do for you, Sarah?" Evelyn asked gently. Sarah opened her notebook, and Evelyn felt a jolt of recognition. Pages filled with observations, patterns, questions about discrepancies no one else seemed to notice. "I think there's something wrong with the overseas supply contracts," Sarah said. "The numbers don't match up. Materials are being ordered at prices that seem inflated, and when I tried to ask about it, my supervisor told me to focus on my assigned work and stop asking questions about things above my pay grade." Evelyn and Victor exchanged a look. "Show me what you found," Evelyn said, sitting down beside Sarah. For the next hour, Sarah walked them through her observations. Patterns in purchasing that suggested kickbacks or fraud. Suppliers that existed on paper but had minimal online presence. Contracts approved without proper oversight. It was familiar. Too familiar. When Sarah finished, Evelyn closed the notebook and handed it back to her. "This is good work," she said. "Detailed, well-documented, exactly the kind of observation we need." "So you'll investigate?" "We'll investigate, but Sarah, I need you to understand something. If what you found is real, if there's actual corruption in the supply chain, exposing it is going to be difficult. People will resist. Your colleagues might turn against you. Your career might be affected." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "I've been watching what happened to you. How people talk about you, some with respect, others with resentment. How you made enemies by refusing to look away." She met Evelyn's eyes. "But you also helped hundreds of people. You changed the system. I want to do that too." Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Recognition, maybe. Or hope. "All right," she said. "Let's see what you found." After Sarah left, Victor poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Evelyn. "Another invisible person who sees everything," he said. "Seems like a pattern." "A good one." Victor raised his glass. "To the people who walk through wrong doors and refuse to pretend they didn't see what's on the other side." Evelyn clinked her glass against his. "To the people who give them authority to do something about it." They drank in comfortable silence, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere in those buildings there were people being exploited, corruption hiding behind corporate respectability, injustice protected by willful blindness. But there were also people like Sarah who refused to stay silent, people like Diana who put themselves in danger to protect others, people like Rosa who rebuilt their lives after being broken by systems that didn't care. And there were people like Victor who'd built an empire on moral gray areas but chose accountability over comfort when forced to confront his own blind spots. The work would never be finished. There would always be another investigation, another exposure, another fight against people who believed their power made them untouchable. But Evelyn had learned something over the past year and a half. She'd learned that invisible people could become visible, that powerless people could find power, that systems could change when someone refused to accept that change was impossible. She'd walked through the wrong door as a janitor nobody noticed. She'd emerged as someone who couldn't be ignored. And in the transformation, she'd discovered that the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't corruption or criminals or networks of exploitation. It was someone who'd been invisible long enough to see everything and who finally found the courage to speak. The empire hadn't fallen, but it had changed, was still changing, one exposure at a time, one victim helped, one piece of corruption cut away. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better. And tomorrow, it would be better still. Because Evelyn Carter, the girl who'd been invisible for so long, had learned the most important lesson of all. Truth didn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needed to be spoken. And she would keep speaking it no matter what doors she had to walk through or what battles she had to fight, for as long as it took to make things right. The work continued. And so did she.